Everybody.
And we're live.
And we are live.
All right, good evening and welcome to the Planning Board meeting for the City of Birmingham for May 13th, 2020. Could we please call the roll?
Fine.
Laura,
Present.
that's you?
Yeah, I heard it.
Fine. I'm speaking.
Present.
Robin Boyle. Robin Boyle.
He's muted.
Robin, you're muted.
Got it.
Here.
Stuart Jeffries.
Here.
Bert Kozak.
Here.
Daniel Scher.
Here.
Brian Williams.
Present.
Janelle Lovell-Boyce.
Here.
Jason Emron.
Here.
Nassim Rumen.
Here.
Rachel Hester. June Lee. Okay.
Wonderful. We are quorum. Let's move into the agenda. Review and approval of the minutes from the regular meeting on April 22nd, 2020. Do we have any comments or corrections from the board? Mr. Williams?
Yes, I joined the meeting at 7:49, but the chairman didn't acknowledge my presence until 7:59.
See how long it takes me tonight.
Just saying.
Any other corrections?
I wanted to make a comment that I thought under the circumstances, the minutes were outstanding in terms of preparation in light of everything that was going on. Just wanted to make the favorable comment. I think it was probably the best minutes I've read.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Excellent. And I do agree.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
Motion by Mr. Williams. Do we have a second?
Second.
Who is the second?
You can have it, Bert. I don't care.
Second by Mr. Kozak. Any conversation on the motion? Seeing none, we will take a roll call vote.
Brian Williams.
Yes.
Bert Kozak.
Yes.
Daniel Scher.
Yes.
Janelle Lovell-Boyce.
Yes.
Robin Boyle.
Yes.
Scott Klein.
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries.
Yes.
Excellent. Motion unanimous. Moving into chairperson's comments. I would like to say a few words today again. I don't need to remind any of you that we are certainly dealing with challenges to nearly every aspect of our lives right now. And we're doing so in order to help promote the health and safety of the community in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to first take a quick moment to thank all of the medical personnel and first responders for your heroic efforts. I'd also like to thank the men and women who are perhaps less heralded, those who are processing and delivering our packages, processing our food products, stocking store shelves, and basically putting yourselves in the front line so that we can get through this new current reality. Secondly, I'd like to state the obvious, which is tonight is the second meeting of the Planning Board in a virtual space. It's important for me to remind everybody that we're doing so under the guidance of the city administration and city attorney to ensure compliance with Governor Whitmer's executive orders. We have the best of intentions tonight to do just that. We hope to leverage the full capabilities of this technology, but I will promise you that there will be some glitches along the way. And I simply ask for your patience tonight, particularly with me. Real quickly, some points of procedure to help us through this. Quick reminder, number one, that all speakers should need to be acknowledged by the chair, which is me. If a board member would like to speak, I prefer you actually raise your physical hand so I can see you. It's a little easier for me. When I open public comment, if any member of the public would like to comment, you can do so by using the raise hand function in the Zoom software. Quickly, number two, when I do recognize you as a member of the public, please state your name and your community of residence so we can clarify the record. I also ask you, number 3, to keep your comments succinct and brief. This medium is not as fluid, if you will, but I'd like to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to speak and we get through our agenda with due course. With regard to some parliamentary procedures, when you make a motion or second a motion, if the board member could please raise your hand so I know who to assign it to, who to blame. And then lastly, all voting, as you have heard, will be done by roll call vote. Finally, I want to indulge myself quickly. I think it's easy for us on the planning board and those in the city staff to forget that many people, in fact, most people that come and watch our meetings and read about our decisions, recommendations, are not as intimately involved in the zoning ordinance or land development world. I've heard a few comments recently in the public that I think demonstrate a basic misunderstanding of what our role as a planning board is, and particularly in the site plan review process. And really quickly, I'd like to provide a little context to those that may be watching. Now, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on television or on Zoom. However, I do know that property owners do have certain land rights, and they have the right to reasonable use of their own property. The city certainly has a right under the Zoning Enabling Act to regulate those rights to some degree. But it also provides us with a responsibility as a community to review proposals in due time. So a couple of things I'd like you all to remember. Number 1, the planning board is only a review agency. We are not proposing projects. We are not going out and soliciting someone build project X on site Y. We do nothing more than review the proposals of landowners. And secondly, we have little recourse other to approve a proposal that has been lawfully submitted and complies with our ordinance, whether we particularly like it or not. Doing otherwise would certainly open the cities to some significant liability, and it is not our charge from the City Commission. So to sum up, as you watch our future meetings, and hopefully you do, you're undoubtedly going to see some proposals that you like and some that you don't. As a resident, you have every right to express your opinions, and in fact, as a board, we have historically done our best to strongly solicit you to provide those opinions, whether they be about the good, the bad, or the ugly of a proposal in front of us. But please do understand that our recommendations, and that's what they are, recommendations for approval or denial must be based on compliance with the ordinance, not on any personal like or dislike of a project or its outcome. So with that, I will put my soapbox away and we will jump back to the agenda. Jana, are there any changes to the agenda as published?
There are no changes, but I would like to make one comment, if that's okay.
Please.
Just for those that are watching, I've received some emails that some folks from the public have been confused as to how to raise their hand. So on the Zoom function, if you go on your screen and you're looking and you see all of the faces of people talking, down at the bottom is the toolbar, usually the bottom, not always, sometimes it's at the top. If you go to manage participants, you'll get a list of all the folks in the meeting on the right-hand side, in a white box. If you go to the bottom of that white box, there's a raise hand tool that shows, and you click on that and it will put a little blue hand up. I can't do that on mine because I am the host, but if you click on that, it'll show a little blue hand in the corner of your video screen. So if you're watching and you want to participate, please do that. Physically raising your hand like this will not be seen because your video is not showing. So I see Nicholas Dupuy has given the thumbs up. It's his version of the hand raise. And that's how we know that you're ready to ask a question, and the chairman will call on you when we get to the public comment section. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's get right at it. Unfinished business. We have a brief bit of housekeeping here, correct, Jana?
Correct.
Is it 35001 Woodward Avenue?
Yes. As you could see from the memo that I placed in the packet, we did review this one. This is the northwest corner of Big Woodward and Maple. It is the proposal that we talked about last time that involves the Hunter House. it came to my attention after the meeting that the floor plan, or the first floor plan that I put on the screen during the Zoom meeting, was actually the old version. So in the interest of being completely open and transparent, I did go ahead and post this on today's agenda again and re-noticed it to all of the property owners within 300 feet so that we can put on the screen the proper plan. And just so that all of you know, the only thing that changed was with regards to the interior walls on the plan. Can everybody see the plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is the latest proposed floor plan, and I will flip to the next page for 1 minute so you can see what I accidentally put up last time at the Zoom meeting was this floor plan, which actually showed a little bit of a different layout for the proposed retail space at the northeast corner of the site, which was labeled as Hunter House. So this one that I'm showing is incorrect. It was actually, the floor plan is this. This does not change anything with regards to the footprint of the building. It does not change anything with regard to exterior changes, doors, windows, etc. It's an interior layout change only, which then shows it, instead of being divided into two Hunter House spaces, it's all one, and then the parking spaces in the back here. So I just wanted to let everybody know and be very clear, because those watching from home would have seen a different plan. I apologize. I do have a proposed motion for you today, if you're willing. Basically, I just would like to see the motion cleaned up to add a condition that states that this is the correct floor plan, which is sheet A101, dated 4/3/20.
Okay, thank you, Jen. To the board, are there any questions from the board on this particular bit of housekeeping?
Mr. Williams has a question.
Mr. Williams, please.
Yeah, I still think, Robin made the motion, I think, at the last meeting on considering number 8. I don't want this to be misunderstood, so I would just, at the end of 9, just add a comma after 20 and say, subject to deletion of the terms Hunter House and HH from the plan.
And just so you know, the applicant is aware that you made that a condition, and they will be removed for final.
Yeah, but they're not removed on the sheet in front of
You're
them.
not, right, because I wanted to show the one that was submitted that I incorrectly showed last time.
Yeah, so I just think adding the phrase, subject to deletion of the terms Hunter House and HH from the plan. Otherwise, the motion that seems to be number 9 is fine. And I'm assuming we're repeating or reiterating 1 through 8.
Yes, the suggested motion language is to amend the motion made on April 22nd, 2020 to approve the preliminary site plan for 35001 Woodward and 35075 Woodward by affirming conditions 1 through 8 and adding condition 9 to the approved motion as follows. Approved plans include the first floor plan on sheet A101 with the revision date 4-3-20, subject to the deletion of the words Hunter House and HH as recently suggested by Mr. Williams.
Okay, on that basis, I'll make the motion to approve.
We have a motion by Mr. Williams. Do we have a second?
Second.
I see a second by Mr. Boyle. Conversation about the motion itself?
Question, I don't mean to complicate things, but if you're going to remove the name Hunter House, should we ask them to put something in place like they have for the other generic spaces that say retail or?
That'd be fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other comments on the motion?
So that you want to, I'll accept a friendly amendment to delete Hunter House and HH as to number 9 and number 8, and insert the phrase retail in its place or in their.
All right. I would suggest whatever. I mean, we don't want to tell them what it'll be. There could be off. Well, maybe it can't be office. Whatever it is, tell us what it is.
Okay. Do we have any other conversations about the motion? Seeing none, I will open it up to the public for comment. Is there anyone in the public that wishes to comment on the motion at hand? Simple procedural move here tonight. I do not see any hands raising. All right, so we will bring it back to the board. Let's do a roll call, please.
Brian Williams,
Yes.
Robin Boyle,
Yes.
Scott Klein,
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries,
Yes.
Bert Kozak,
Yes.
Daniel Scher,
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce.
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you much. Moving along, I've got far too many windows and screens to look at. Moving along to item 2, which is 219 Elm Street. It is a community impact study review for a new 5-story multifamily building. Jana, we're all good with noticing and signage placement today?
Yes, they did pick up their sign and they've indicated they posted it on the property. And yes, the noticing is valid because we did postpone it to a date certain at the last
Excellent.
meeting.
Well, please, can you begin the report?
Okay, Nick?
All right, everybody, that's me. Hi, nice to see you all again. Just to say so, as usual, I'll be doing a relatively quick summary of this report. It's kind of a long one, so if at any point, if you'd rather stop me where I am or save a question to the end, if I gloss over anything or skip anything you feel is important, feel free to do so. So what I've got here for you is a community impact study review and preliminary site plan review. I'll be doing the community impact study review first for you. This is for a proposed 5-story building at 219 Elm Street. It's located at the north end of the Triangle District and the MU3 and O2 zoning districts. At present, the just under half-acre parcel contains a modest 2-story office building, a parking lot, roughly 25 parking spaces, and some associated landscaping. So this community impact study per Article 7, Section 7.27E of the zoning ordinance requires any new building over 20,000 square feet in gross floor area or greater to prepare a community impact study. As this building is proposed at just over 45,000 square feet, here we are. Just as a reminder, this CIS acts as a foundation for discussion between the planning board and the applicant beyond the normal scope of info addressed in the preliminary site plan review application. The planning board accepts the CIS prior to taking action on the preliminary site plan. So planning and zoning issues, the proposed use is strictly an independent senior living facility, which is a permitted use in the O2 zoning district with a special land use permit. In regards to the Triangle District Urban Design Plan, there are several goals and intents in that plan, and the proposal does well to consider many of the recommendations in that urban design plan. The proposed building placement, height, circulation, efficient parking match the general intent of the plan, but there are some shortcomings that I noticed. The proposed building is not proposed as mixed use with residents located over commercial spaces. It's strictly residences. And it is also unclear what sustainable building or site design elements are proposed. And finally, the building height and massing is compatible with the existing all seasons to the north and some of the new buildings on Forest on the west. But it's actually much larger than the buildings directly to the south, and then a little bit east where there's a single family residentially zoned district. And the applicant has indicated and explained many of those proposals for why they fit the general intent of the urban design plan. But ultimately, we believe the proposal only partially meets the purpose and intent. But once the building design has been fully developed, perhaps at final site plan, the applicant may add considerable amount of sustainable building techniques that could offset that loss in mixed use in kind of a trade-off. For land development issues, the applicant has provided a phase 1 environmental site assessment, as well as soils information that's a little dated, but they submitted it. The results indicated there are generally no land development issues on site. The soil composition suitable for development. There may be a potential for some deeper, wider footings depending on what happens when they break ground. It's a flat site, no steep slopes. There's a preliminary calculation for excavated soils at about 200 cubic yards. They plan to use strictly maple and woodward for their ingress and egress with all the construction materials and hauling. The phase 1 environmental site assessment was completed by ASTI Environmental. It included a site inspection, interviews, review of Eagle, City of Birmingham, and Oakland County records, et cetera, et cetera. The ESA describes the property as a dwelling all the way from 1937 until 1987. After that, several additions were made. It was transformed to office use. And they noted a filling station that was north of the property in the past. So they continued with a phase 2 ESA in 2012 and found no volatile organic compounds. And I say in 2012, that was for the site to the north. Found no volatile organic compounds. Polynuclear aromatic compounds were detected in the soil borings, but concentrations did not exceed the general residential cleanup criteria. And in conclusion, based on the findings, the site did not have any recognized environmental conditions present. The applicant indicated that a potential hazard or nuisance related to the development is its position next to the public sidewalks. So general construction issues happen there, noise, dust, debris. The applicant must submit details on how they plan to mitigate that dust, noise, and debris during construction. Utilities, noise, and air. There are plenty of hookups to existing utilities in the area. DTE for electric on the overhead lines just south of the property in the alley. Consumers energy from an existing gas main on Elm. AT&T and Comcast also proposed to come from the overhead lines. And we note that any easements that will be required for utilities have not been obtained at this time. We're not sure if they're necessary, but the applicant has indicated that they will do so. The applicant has not submitted a noise impact study at this time. I believe they were working on it, and I'll let the applicant speak to this more, but the COVID-19 pandemic put a halt on a few things. So long story short, it has not been submitted, and they are required to submit that noise impact study to complete the community impact study review. And lastly, the subject site was located in the Southeast Michigan Air Quality District, and no issues in air quality were noted. Environmental design, historic values. The existing building, all the trees, the site landscaping, and associated improvements will be removed from the site. The site's flat, no regrading will be necessary. Worth noting that the proposed building will cover much more of the site at roughly 96.9% of the site, whereas the existing building covers 81.3% of the site, which may create some issues. The building will also be considerably taller than the buildings directly to the south and most of the buildings to the west. However, as I mentioned before, the building does match the scale of the existing All Seasons directly to the north and the new buildings on Forest to the southwest. As I alluded to before, although it's unclear at this time, it appears as though the applicant will be building towards a LEED certification. They note individual HVAC controls, no smoking, an intensive recycling program, and access to multimodal options as some of the things they're considering for that LEED certification, but they have not done so yet. I expect that'll probably come up as the building design progresses. The applicant has also acknowledged that that proposed building is larger than the existing building, which will affect the amount of sunlight that its neighbors will receive. And then all the waste receptacles will be inside, so there will be no visual pollution in regards to solid waste. As I mentioned earlier, the house was a dwelling from 1937 to 1987. It doesn't appear that that dwelling was ever removed, so we expect that it might be on site at some capacity. The CIS indicated that the property does not indicate in the State Historic Preservation Office historical listings, and that no adjacent properties appear historic or appear in the State Historic Preservation Office historical listings, which we confirmed at the city. But the applicant did not appear to have contacted the Department of Interior or the State Historic Preservation Office to make a determination on the eligibility of the property. So currently the applicant does not need to go for the Historic District Commission. Refuse sewer water, much like the utility section, they plan to connect to several existing lines in Elm Street and the alley, which they have claimed will adequately serve the development. They plan to use SACRA for their waste removal. And I noted in this section, I just thought it was worth noting that the proposed development is within the George W. Kuhn Stormwater Drainage District. And the city has been very active in recent discussions in the, I'll say GWK for short, Drainage District, Multi-Community Collaboration Stormwater Standards and Code Enforcement Project. That's kind of a mouthful. But basically, it aims to reduce the amount of stormwater runoff that enters the combined sewer system that runs through that property and through that entire side of Woodward. So they're in first draft. It's not necessarily requirements yet that they provide some sort of green infrastructure techniques or stormwater reduction techniques, but that is coming down the pike, so I thought it was worth mentioning. Public safety. The CIS explains that the site fronts Elm Street and a public alley, so that excellent access is provided for emergency vehicles. The elevators will be able to accept medical carts. The CIS indicates that all fire codes for access, layout, hydrant coverage, etc. will be met. Although the pavement specs have not yet been designed, the applicant has stated that all site pavement will be able to handle the weight of those emergency vehicles. Finally, the applicant has indicated that the building fire suppression system has not been designed. They will need to supply that fire suppression system plan to the fire department for review. Transportation, the applicant submitted a Form A, and also noting that they would be willing to provide a Form B if the city's traffic consultants required it. Their estimates were 135 vehicles per day, 9 vehicles in and out in the AM peak hour, 12 in and out in the PM peak hour. And as described in the lead certification process, they also have access to several smart bus stations, bike racks, and other multimodal options. And in addition, they will have also planned to provide a regularly scheduled shuttle service for shopping, doctor's visits, church services, etc., all within a 5-mile radius. The city's traffic consultant has reviewed that Form A and concurs that the proposed development will generate less traffic than the existing development, and that was included in your documents today for this meeting today. Parking issues. The CIS had mentioned that the new development will supply 27 parking spaces where 12 are required. I noted a discrepancy in the CIS documents and the site plans. I counted 22 with 10 in garages and 12 in the rear parking lot. So I'd just like them to clarify, and we will get into a more parking conversations in depth in the preliminary site plan review. Natural features, again, I noted just basic landscaping is present on site, several mature trees, sure, but there are no ponds, no significant natural features. The Rouge River is on the other side of Woodward at that point. So also no wetlands, etc., no floodplain. So I just mentioned at a small scale, the removal of those mature trees in the existing landscape may temporarily damage existing habitats, birds, bees, butterflies, flora, fauna. The planning board may wish to consider requiring the landscaping proposed and detailed in the preliminary site plan review to be native to support the wildlife that will be displaced or potentially be displaced. Several other departments have reviewed this. Most had no comments at this time. The fire department had somewhat extensive comments, including point 4 in the report from the fire department comments that the proposed location of the FDC is not acceptable. The FDC will need to be relocated to the street elm side of the building and be placed in an unobstructed location approved by the fire marshal. The police department wanted to know about parking when the discrepancies are resolved. In summation, after all that, the outstanding issues remain in regard to the CIS. 1, the applicant must submit details on how they plan to mitigate dust, noise, and debris during construction. 2, the applicant must submit a noise impact study to complete the community impact study. 3, the applicant must contact the Department of the Interior or the State Historic Preservation Office to make a determination on the historic eligibility of the property. And 4, the applicant must provide all details on the fire suppression system to the fire department for review. And that leads to the suggested action, which we recommend that you accept the community impact study as provided for 219 Elm Street, all seasons 2, with the following conditions. They're the same as the outstanding issues remaining, so I'll just summarize them. The noise, dust, debris mitigation, the noise impact study, contacting SHPO, and providing all the details to the fire department.
All right, thank you, Nick. For those of you watching, a community impact study is meant to identify the impacts, not necessarily solve the puzzle. So with that, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 points. One, my own personal view is I think the omission of the plan to mitigate dust, noise, and debris is not only a concern to the neighbors to the south and east, but my recollection is right across Elm, you've got a huge, which we approved, a huge residential 5-story development with a lot of outside terraces or porches. So this to me is a significant issue that we don't have a plan, not only to the east, but to my view, the west, because those are, at least by my standards, pretty expensive condos. The second item I had really related to the concern on sewer and whether there are sufficient green infrastructure initiatives in connection with the George W. Kuhn drain. Now, this is something I actually know something about. The Kuhn drain, of course, accommodates 14 communities running basically along Woodward down to over to Madison Heights. And charges in the Kuhn are based on flow. Originally, when Birmingham constructed its CSO facilities, the charges were based on water consumption. That changed over time. Among other things, Madison Heights separated stormwater from sewer. So my question here is the insertion of this paragraph. Is the city expecting us to deal with this issue on the planning board? Does the city intend to insist that the developer separate stormwater runoff in some capacity or develop green infrastructure initiatives? Or are we just putting them on warning? Because once this is done, it's very difficult to undo. They're going to add stormwater runoff to the system. That will increase flow into the Kuhn, and therefore charges to the city of Birmingham, including everybody who is a member of the planning board, will go up because it's based on flow now, not based on water consumption. So what's the purpose of inserting this, Nick? If you either want us to do something about us or put them on notice, but if they don't develop the green infrastructure in the initiative in the beginning, I'm hard pressed to see how the city could insist that they do something after the fact any more than they could do any other entity that's completed construction.
Yes, Mr. Williams, you're very correct that this is super preliminary. Like I said, it's only in first draft stage, so there are no regulations in place. There's no necessarily forcing the applicant to do these things. And they did indicate that because of the size of the development and relative to the size of the parcel, the smaller landscaped area, that the capacity of, if they were to make that a rain garden or some sort of green infrastructure, would not be adequate. It was simply just kind of to spark an idea. I know they're going for LEED certification, so they could opt for a green roof, which is part of a LEED certification that may help with stormwater mitigation. And I know this is going to end up being a special land use permit, so we may be able to attach certain things like that.
Well, it strikes me that the city commission is going to want to deal with this because the city commission is very concerned about minimizing stormwater runoff. If you look at the whole history of construction, I think Stuart may know better than I do on Lincoln, there were steps taken to separate stormwater runoff along the improvements to Lincoln years ago, and to get it out of the system itself. So it could be an issue. And I think the developers got to be aware of it, because every time you dump stormwater or additional stormwater into the combined system, the charges go up, and they affect everybody in the city.
And there are plenty of options on the table, from permeable pavement to making that landscape feature in the back more functional to a green roof. So I just thought there were more options than they were necessarily willing to admit. So I thought I'd put it in there just to spark some conversation.
So Nick, before I go on to a couple other members, just to be clear, and again, we're doing the community impact study and not the site plan. We are not the designers. There are requirements that they will need to follow related to city ordinance, engineering standards. You're talking about something that is not quite to that point yet, correct? It is outside of those requirements?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Secondly, I think it's very important to note that they are asking for 2 additional floors, which requires them to provide some measure of additional sustainability in this project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so by outlining it in the CIS, you're putting them on notice that that could be an area where they could look to fulfill some of their required sustainability functions, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Kozak.
2 questions or statements. Nick, if I go to page 66, 67 of my package here, the very first section, planning and zoning issues. And I'll preface this by saying that, I'm always confused about the CIS and the preliminary because we tie them together, but we don't. But so under section 1.2, Triangle District Urban Design Plan. So the first item says develop a fully integrated mixed-use pedestrian-oriented environment with buildings containing commercial, residential, office, similar to the downtown character. My interpretation of that is that not every building must be a mixed-use building, but the district as a whole should be mixed-use and contain commercial, residential, office, and other sorts of things. Is that a correct interpretation? Because you went on in your paragraph below that to state that the proposed building is not mixed use with residents located, So you sort of said, in my interpretation and your statement was that it doesn't comply, but I mean, if somebody wanted to build a residential building that's 3 stories tall or something, you're allowed to do that. I presume it's zoning district. You're not obligated to have a different use on the first floor. Is that correct?
That's right. And although our ordinance was formed around these master plans, it's not necessarily ordinance. However, of course, the use type is ordinance. In the Triangle District overlay standards in Article 3, independent senior living is not a listed use. So we would revert to the underlying zoning district, which is O2, and that is a permitted use with a special land use permit in the O2 zoning district.
Okay.
So they are allowed to, it just doesn't necessarily match the intent of the Triangle District Urban Design Plan.
Okay, and then two more items. So you made the comment about being compatible. I think you said, in your opinion, this is compatible with neighboring buildings. The All Seasons is 4 stories. Is that correct?
Part of it's 5 stories, the northerly part along Maple in kind of a U shape. And there's a section at the rear of the southern part of the building that I believe is 3 stories.
Okay, and then to the west, we have 3-story buildings in, of course, the single-family residential neighborhood.
Yeah, and to the west, there's that new building on the north corner of Forest and Elm. That's 3 stories. And on the south side, that new brand spanking new building is 3 stories fronting Elm, and it steps up to 5 stories closer to Elm.
And then lastly, I don't know what the expectation or the requirement is in the community impact study regarding LEED or sustainable design. I think if I were doing this as an architect, I would go above and beyond. So is there a level of LEED certification that's required, or is it just simply LEED certification?
The latter, just LEED certified.
Okay, and so in any case, that's still a pretty high bar, much beyond these 5, 6, 7 bullet points. I mean, these are, what we call the low fruit sort of thing. Nobody's ever going to smoke in this building. Good, I got a point. Now I get to add 2 floors to the building. I mean, wouldn't it, I guess a broader question is, are they obligated to be more descriptive of how they're accomplishing it and show the point system as opposed to being sort of generic here? Is this enough for us to approve a community impact study on?
Well, they would eventually have to, because they didn't explicitly tell us that they're going for LEED certification, but all indications point that way as one of the requirements for those extra heights. So I might pitch it to Jana for a little bit of a historical perspective on what we've required before, but we would require proof that they are going for LEED certification.
Just a quick interruption. Have we ever done this before? I think it's unique to the Triangle District. Has anybody ever submitted an application under that premise?
Getting extra stories in exchange for providing 2 of those 5 items? Is that what you're asking? Yes. People have done that. That's how they got the 5 stories on the phase 1 of All Seasons. That's also how they got the 5 stories on the southwest corner of Forest and Elm.
Okay.
So I guess to further maybe explain, Bert, they don't necessarily have to do LEED. There are 5 or 6 options that they can choose to get those extra 2 floors. It just appeared as though in the CIS documents that LEED certification would be one of them.
And maybe they can tell us a little bit more about that when they...
Sure.
Thanks.
Mr. Boyle.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Through you to staff, 2 points of clarification. Both of them, I think, important for both the CIS and indeed for the next level. The CIS report contains a lot of information that was actually collected for the adjacent All Seasons building. It's a different building, a different site, and as we've all read, or at least looked at some of it is, it started in 2008 and was actually submitted to the city in 2010. That's a significant time ago. Now, I admit a lot of this material is historical, but nevertheless, my question really bluntly is, can we accept a CIS that is grounded to some extent on material that was collected for another building at an earlier time? So that's my first question. The second question is probably a little bit more serious, and it's one that I'm getting increasingly confused about. This is a proposal that's come to us for assisted living. the property we're looking at doesn't have anything else other than residential development. So that would suggest that the assisted living amenities are being brought from somewhere else. And indeed, in the CIS, the reference is made to, there's one reference, as far as I can remember, to actually the residents of this new building making use of services available in the all seasons, which means, in some sense, that it's not a separate building. And there's my level of searching for clarification. Are we dealing with an annex to the all seasons, or are we dealing with a new property? And if so, I think we need to be clear as to what we're doing here.
Well, to be honest, I kind of forgot a bit of your first question. Would you mind repeating it?
The first question was fairly straightforward, and that was,
right.
To what extent can we accept a CIS based upon material that was collected for another site, another building, 10 to 12 years ago?
So I will say that I did pose that question to the applicant, and he did seem to be amicable to providing those documents to us. As far as if they're required, I'd like to pitch that to Jenna, if that's all right.
Obviously, we do need to have an up-to-date CIS. I think it's fair to say that none of the uses have changed. For instance, on the soil borings that were taken on the all-season site, none of the uses around there have changed much in the way of adding to contamination, so they're probably not that much different, but they are required to be updated, and we have talked to the applicant about getting soil borings done on their site. Again, I don't think there's going to be much different, but it does need to be updated. Let's see, what else is there? The noise study and such, yes, has to be updated as well, because again, things are different on that site now. There's a 5-story building at all seasons where there was a vacant site before, so that will be different as well. The applicant has indicated that with the COVID pandemic that's going on, he'd had a hard time getting people out there to take a look at it and update those things. So it's up to you if you want to decide whether to consider approval with conditions that they update some of those items. That's up to the board. But certainly, I think they would need to update at the very least the soil and the noise study.
And the environmental, correct?
Well, sorry, I'm putting environmental in with soil, yes.
Thank you. Okay.
So I'm not sure about I'm sorry, Scott.
I was going to say, Mr. Boyle, your second question, and I'd like Nick, and perhaps we should ask the applicant. My understanding with it that this is not an assisted living facility, but it is a senior independent living facility, which has significantly different sets of requirements and are different under the law, or at least under building codes, if you will. So I'm wondering if that impacts your concern or your thinking.
That's correct. It's independent senior living. So it's no different than multifamily residential.
The applicant had indicated in earlier conversations, and I believe at the preliminary or pre-app discussion, that this is going to be more for not necessarily senior citizens, but people getting close to that still want to have their own space, but not necessarily an assisted living environment. So yeah, for sure, I'd like to pitch that for more explanation to the applicant, but that's what we were told.
Point taken. Nonetheless, my other point about using the amenities of the adjacent building as part of this building, and whether it's in use or in promoting it, I still think there's an issue there that we need to be clear. I'm not falling one way or the other. I think we just need some clarity. Is this a freestanding building, or is it really an extended all season? I think that's a fair point.
Well, I've discussed this at length with the applicant, and we can put them on. If somebody from the applicant team, I see there's several members here, if you can raise your hand, depending on who wishes to be the one to speak. But I have talked to the applicant extensively on this. It's a separate standalone building. It's not connected in any way by construction. However, it is the same owner, obviously, and the people that live in this building will be able to walk over and dine in the other All Seasons building. So it's physically not connected, but obviously the ownership is connected, and some of the amenities will be available to the people that live in this building from phase one.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we can take this up when we get to the preliminary site plan review, and the applicant or the owner, the developer, can talk to these points. I think that's valid. I just wanted to get up.
Did you want me to there is an applicant willing to answer? Do you want that now or later?
Just in a moment. I do see that. I just want to make sure that no one else on the board had any questions before we go to the applicant.
Okay.
And again, remembering we are talking about the community impact study, not the full-on preliminary site plan at this time. Any other questions of Nick or staff? No? Great. So I do see that gentleman has his hand raised. Looks like it's Mark, if that's correct. I apologize for not being perhaps a little too informal, but...
that is Mark Highland, and I'm turning on his video right now.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey, Mark.
Before we start, Mr. Klein, I wanted to mention, you mentioned earlier in the meeting that there's going to be glitches, but I've been participating in a number of Zoom meetings so far, and this is not the smoothest start. So
just jinx me.
Your staff.
Thank you, though.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify, first of all, that this is not going to be assisted living. It is strictly independent living. With the existing All Seasons building, we have residents who are primarily 75 years old or older. What we're looking to do here is provide a building that is geared more towards your 55 to 65 to 70-year-olds, where there's still a lot more independence. They aren't going to be utilizing, the services of the building very much, but it provides a transitional location where they could stay in the area, and if they need to, then they can move over. So what we're expecting here is an apartment building geared towards seniors and only for senior citizens, but at a much younger age than what is currently in the All Seasons. Amenities would be available to them. Don't expect many to use them, but in the event that they would need to or want to go to one of the outings we provide, they can certainly join in on that. If they wanted to have some meal service plan, they could do something like that. But we don't expect it to be utilized nearly as much as a resident of the original building would. It is a separate ownership. It consists of some of the same people, but it's purchased under a different ownership and development entity. Regarding the LEED certificate, we are going to be asking for a LEED certification. So the process is going to be us. When we start submitting plans, we will have to have a third party who is looking at our designs and basically creating a scorecard. It shows what we are meeting that would meet the LEED certificate requirements. That would be submitted during later in like the site planning stage, and also for building permits, we'd have to submit a card that shows all the different design standards that fall under the LEED's umbrella. Then during construction, this third party would also inspect all the installation of these items, and then we would then submit at a later date for the actual certificate from the LEED's group. Now, the only reason we don't go well into that is there are so many ways to achieve the certification, from various fixtures and utilities and air conditioning systems and window glazing and non-volatile glues. And, there's just so many different ways to meet it that we're too early in the process to tell you exactly what we're going to do, because there's just too many options to go through.
But you acknowledge that that's a requirement.
I don't know that it's required, but we are going to be, as part of our attempt to gain the extra couple of floors. We're committing to that. Okay. And the rest of the stuff for the community impact statement, as you know, Michigan, the construction industry and related industries has been stopped for quite a few weeks, months now, and we've got Colano and Saha, who did the original noise study for the original All Seasons. They are under contract now that some of the stay-at-home requirements are lifted. They're going to be pairing that. So we will be submitting that information now that they are allowed to get out to the site and actually do the sound studies and stuff. So those will be submitted in the next, hopefully, few weeks. I'm not sure how long their backlog is at this point, but those will be submitted, and you'll have them long before we come back in with any kind of preliminary site plans and things like that that will be required for your review.
Okay.
I think that kind of covers some of the big items. The dust, noise, and debris, we'll have to be providing those plans as well. We just wanted to kind of make sure we understood the scope of what we're doing and what the city's going to allow us to develop on the site before we got into that kind of detailed plan. But obviously those will have to be put through the entire review and permit process. So we're aware of all the requirements. It's just right now we want to make sure we have a project before we go too far in depth in the actual design of it.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a couple of questions from the board. Mr. Williams, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, my first question was the units that we're talking about within the building, are they rental?
Yes.
Okay. That was the only question I had.
Okay. Mr. Boyle, did you have a question? I thought I saw you raise your hand.
No, that was great. I got part of it answered, and I'll come back later on under the preliminary site plan.
Wonderful. Any other questions from the board for the applicant? Okay. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your input. At this point, I'm going to open up comment on the community impact study to the public. Again, you can use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen. If you wish to make a comment, I will look to see if anyone would like to discuss. And again, this is the community impact study only. I do not see any comments from the public, so we will bring it back to the board. Board, is there any conversation, anything anyone would like to start, kick us off? Mr. Williams.
This is really a question for Jana. Historically, as we look at a project of this magnitude, it concerns me that we don't have even a preliminary plan for construction mitigating dust, noise, and debris. And this is a project which is very close to residential areas. So I guess the question is, have we done this before on this kind of a situation? I don't recall that we have without even a preliminary study.
So I see Nick's got his hand up. Jana, I don't know if that's for you or Nick, but either of you please jump in.
Go ahead, Nick.
Just wanted to say quickly that although you are correct that an overall plan has not been submitted, they did, I believe, at least mention that they're going to have to shift the sidewalk a little bit, use scaffolding and covering to protect the passersby. Just wanted to throw that in there.
And if I could add, what generally they say is that they will comply with all of the city's requirements, and they would be required to have a logistics meeting with the building and engineering department prior to construction and make sure that all of these issues are taken care of, whether it's sidewalk shed, pedestrian protection, dust, hosing down the streets if there's issues, all of that, once they are about ready to start construction. Is it fair to say to the applicant that they intend to comply with those requirements as well?
Well, absolutely. I think we mentioned in our application too that we acknowledge we're going to have to do the scaffolding and cover the. Sorry, start my video. Okay. We know we're going to have to install the scaffolding to cover the sidewalks. We know we're going to have to install this fence with fabric screening to help mitigate dust. We're just it's a little early in our plan to kind of determine where everything is going to go and how it's going to fit. But if we can certainly provide one, if the building and the project itself seem appropriate for this area, we can certainly provide that. I just didn't want to get ahead of the gun on that topic.
If I could respond,
Mr. Williams.
I think that if you look at the motion language that's been suggested, and this is the reason I raised the issue, I think the developer needs to understand that those issues must be resolved prior to final site plan.
Absolutely.
I would simply say if they aren't, you're not going to get approval.
Understood.
Okay.
Let me ask another question of maybe if they don't seek to get lead approval of the top two floors off?
This is for you.
More of a legal question for the city, frankly.
What are the requirements for us to approve the 2 stories, or for them to get them?
So, just doing it by memory for now until I pull it up. You need either LEED certification, you need to pay X amount towards a public parking facility in the Triangle District. You need to provide a dedicated improved public plaza. You need to provide a mixed-use building, or you can do a transfer of development rights for additional floor area.
And it's 2 of those, is that correct, Nick?
Yeah. 2 out of 5, correct.
2 out of 5, okay. So we will need that clearly identified in any preliminary and final site plan that they submit, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We absolutely agree to that. We would do a public plaza, but it would only be about 3 square feet. So with the first 2.
Fair point.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Kozak.
Just a comment about the, in my opinion, it's a chicken and egg thing a little bit. I think our, I don't like this aspect of our zoning ordinance relative to LEED because no one controls whether you get those points or not, other than the USGBC, the United States Green Building Council, and that's not done until your building is completed and occupied. And so it's conceivable that they don't certify it. They claim that you didn't meet the bar. And so what do you do at that point? So it's a flaw that we have in our system. Me as an architect and the kind of work that we do, and we're often obligated to do these type buildings because our client wants them. We shoot really, really high, knowing that the USGBC is going to take some points probably off because they won't accept it or have a different interpretation. Or you had a contractor who, threw some stuff in the dumpster and he shouldn't have. So just be aware of it. To add 2 floors to a building, to a 3-story building, that's pretty significant. Whatever it is, as a developer, I think you need to take it really serious. Make sure you're doing all the things correctly.
And if I may add, Scott?
Yes, please, Jana.
When somebody is looking through the details of their development and their HVAC systems and the type of paints and the type of flooring and all of that, there is quite a detailed worksheet that they can use to calculate, or at least attempt to calculate, the points that they're going to get in hopes of getting the LEED certification. So it's not like they're going into it completely blindly, but as Mr. Kosek pointed out, it's ultimately up to the U.S. Green Building Council, not them, but they are able to go through and look at how many points they're going to get for the types of amenities they have.
Mr. Boyle.
I wondered if we could perhaps move along by suggesting a motion and see if that takes us to the end of the CIS, because I know there's a lot of issues to come up under the next one.
Yes, you're reading my mind, sir. Please proceed.
So I'd like to insert another statement under the motion. So I'd like to add the first one, on my opinion, should be the applicant must submit an updated environmental/soil assessment. That would be number 1. Number 2 would be the applicant must submit details as to how they plan to mitigate noise, dust and debris during construction. Number 3, applicant must submit a noise impact study to complete the CIS. 4, the applicant must contact the Department of the Interior or SHPO to make a determination on the historic eligibility of the property. And 5, the applicant must provide all details on fire suppression system to the fire department for review.
So you haven't added, I'll second the motion, but you haven't said when.
A good question. A great question.
Right now, the suggested language is on all of them that it be done prior to final site plan.
Doesn't say that, does it, Brian?
Yeah.
The sample motion does, yes, for the 4 items listed.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. I was looking at the wrong thing. And make sure that is added. That is very important. Yes.
And what about your added point number 1? When would you like that submitted?
Same time.
Okay. So is that your motion?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Motion, Mr. Boyle. Second, Mr. Williams, to accept the CIS. Is there any conversation at the board level on the motion itself? I see no hands. I will then open it to the public. Is there anyone in the public who would like to comment on the motion? And I see none. So we'll bring it back to the board, and we'd like to ask for a roll call, please.
Robin Boyle,
Yes.
Brian Williams,
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce,
Yes.
Scott Klein,
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries,
Yes.
Bert Kozak,
Yes.
Daniel Scher.
Yes.
Scott, 2 people did actually end up raising their hand a little bit too late.
Oh, let's hear them.
I see one individual.
It was Mark Hyland, who has since removed his hand, and Sam Beznos.
Okay. Well, we have just voted, but you're the applicant. We've got you next on the agenda anyway. Mark or Mr. Beznos, would you like to comment? Start with you, Mark. Was that?
I just wanted to point out that the fire suppression system generally is designed during the detailed architectural plans because it has to fit in between and along with all the electrical wiring and plumbing and everything else. We could certainly provide our intent in a schematic for the fire suppression to the fire department so that they understand the system and they are good with it, but the final details won't be done until the rest of the mechanical and plumbing systems are designed.
And I'm sure we'll leave that to you.
Possible that could be a requirement, prior to receiving a building permit versus final site plan.
Well, it is a requirement to submit information to the fire department so that they're comfortable with your approach.
Yes.
So that would satisfy the requirement of the motion.
Okay, that's fine.
Just work through staff and the fire department on those details.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful. Let us move along to the next item, which is actually the preliminary site plan for 219 East Maple, if I'm not mistaken. Nick, is this you as well?
That's me. All right. Pulling up some stuff here. Again, just like last time, if you all don't mind, I'll just summarize this report. Feel free to stop me if you feel it important or save the questions to the end. As the second part of this application, we've got the preliminary site plan review. Again, this is for a 5-story, 45-ish thousand new independent senior living complex in the O2 and MU3 zoning districts. Again, the site presently contains a 2-story office building and associated improvements. The existing land use is commercial. The zoning immediately adjacent to that property is generally a mix of office and multifamily. But again, just to note, a little over, I believe it was 150 feet away, there is a single family zoning district to the east. Setback and height requirements, both placement, height, are all summarized in your zoning compliance summary, but there were some issues that I noted that I wanted to say now. The applicant had submitted site plans showing elevations with the walls at the east and west setbacks. I believe I meant to say north and south setbacks. Apologies on that. Containing windows. Article 3, Section 3.08B of the zoning ordinance requires walls at the side setback line that contain windows to be set back 10 feet. The east, which would be the south, excuse my error there, setback line is adjacent to an alley, which permits the applicant a 0-foot setback. Pause. We did discuss this a lot during the 770 South Adams discussion. It is in the ordinance. It's in the VIA overlay activation district, so it's permitted. Just thought I'd note. However, the applicant must submit plans showing that the side setback at the north end of the property at 10 feet, as there is a window proposed on that elevation. Currently proposed, it's something like 5 or 6, I believe. I'll have to clarify that. The maximum building height permitted in that MU3 zoning district is 42 feet, 3 stories. An additional 24 feet, as we've discussed rather intensively now. 2 stories can be granted with the fulfillment of 2 of those 5 lead certification, payment to a public parking deck, public plaza, transfer of development rights, or the mixed use. So the applicant must complete 2 of those requirements to receive the additional building height. The plans submitted also show a minor building overhang at the front setback line. It's above 8 feet, starting at the 2nd floor. Fairly new, Article 4, Section 4.74 states that permanent architectural features such as windows, balconies, overhangs that encroach into the right-of-way above 8 feet may be approved by the planning board, provided that they do not extend 2 feet or more into the right-of-way or create an obstruction, and that encroachment complies with the design review standards set forth in Article 7. The proposed projections encroach roughly 1.25 feet into the right-of-way and thus may be approved by the planning board. And finally, the applicant is proposing a rooftop use on this building, which is permitted under Article 5 of the zoning ordinance. The 1,200 square foot rooftop terrace is proposed at a setback of 5 feet from the eave line, which is required, but does not appear to have proposed any structures or elements such as habitable enclosures or isinglass. The applicant must submit a detailed rooftop plan showing any uses, including any proposed structures, for review by final site plan. As mentioned in the CIS, the dumpster and recycling and solid waste facilities will be located inside of the building on the alley side in a waste facility, 1 trash dumpster and 2 95-gallon recycling bins. The parking lot, the zoning ordinance requires that parking lot be screened along the setback line. The applicant is proposing to utilize the public alley as access to that parking lot, the aisle being roughly 25 feet wide. And that remaining alley frontage is proposed as landscaping with grow low sumac. The proposed plant is wide, but it doesn't necessarily get tall, aka it wouldn't fully screen the parking area as required. If a masonry screen wall were proposed, it would have to adhere to the minimum of 32 inches in height with of capped masonry. The planning board may allow for variations in the screen wall material, including the use of evergreen shrubs. So either way, the applicant must fully screen that parking facility at the setback line, either using the evergreen landscaping if the planning board so desires, or the 32-inch masonry screen wall. Mechanical and equipment screening, does not appear to be any proposed ground-mounted mechanical equipment at this time. As the site develops, the applicant is required to adjust the site plans to show all newly proposed electrical transformers or building-mounted meters, gas meters, etc., and provide screening from public view. The rooftop plan submitted did indicate a defined area for rooftop mechanical units. They show a generator in that space, but no other AC condensers or any other RTUs. The applicant must show those details on a roof plan at final site plan review to ensure full screening. The landscaping, again, it's located mostly at the north side of the property. There's a little landscape bed at the north side of the parking lot. Although the parking lot does not require landscaping, as it is less than 7,500 square feet, which is the threshold for parking lot landscaping. But nonetheless, they do propose a small landscaping area. But as stated in the CIS, we may wish to modify that landscaping area to be more functional, depending on the preference and the results of the LEED certification. Streetscape elements. The applicant is proposing to fully furnish the streetscape with the required street trees, street lights, benches, waste receptacles, and bike racks. The proposed development contains 138 feet of frontage, which requires 3.5 trees and streetlights. The applicant's proposing five trees and 3 streetlights, all spaced at 40 feet apart. The applicant is proposing 2 bike racks at the south side of the property in a little cutout of the building. And the site plan also shows 2 benches and 2 waste receptacles, one set being closer to the southern end of the property and one set a little more central within the frontage. Parking, as I mentioned before, there's going to be an off-street parking facility. This particular use as an independent senior living community requires 0.5 off-street parking spaces per unit proposed. The applicant is proposing 24 units, thus 12 off-street parking spaces are required. The site plans, as I mentioned earlier, show 10 spaces in private garages and 12 parking spaces in an off-street parking facility at the rear. I just re-note again that I'd like the applicant to clarify exactly how many parking spaces are being provided, as I got conflicting numbers were submitted. Loading, no loading spaces are required, thus none are proposed. Vehicle circulation, again, vehicles are proposed to access the site via the alley at the south. Again, referencing the letter submitted by the traffic consultant, it was suggested that a more centralized pickup drop-off area be utilized for this facility. They suggested perhaps the existing All Seasons to the north, but nonetheless, vehicle circulation and access related. Pedestrian circulation, the access to the majority of the site will be through a main entrance and lobby located at the northwest corner of the building. They can then access their units via stairs, elevator. There are 3 first-floor units that have direct access from the Elm Street frontage, but it is unclear as to how residents or guests may access the building from the rear parking facilities, whether they have to park there and walk all the way around to the northwest entrance, or there are access doors in the back that everybody can enter, guests or visitors and residents, is somewhat unclear. Lighting, the applicant does appear to be proposing some wall sconces from Air Lantern, but has not indicated the placement or any specs on those proposed lanterns on the elevation drawings. So by final site plan, the applicant must submit details on all new lighting types and placements, as well as a photometric plan showing the illumination levels at all property lines. Departmental reports, fairly standard from the engineering department. No comments from DPS. The fire department had similar comments as explained in the CIS, as well as the police department. The design review, the applicant has submitted elevation drawings, only one colored elevation side, which would be the west side at this point. I don't have any material specs yet. I don't have any for facade materials, windows, doors, what have you, to complete this design review. However, traditionally, these are done at final site plan. So I just note that the applicant must submit those material specs, samples, glazing calcs for the design review by final site plan. Required attachments, I note that everything has been submitted except for the existing conditions plan first, which I would like to say was not corrected in time. The applicant did submit an existing conditions plan that is in your packet on page 289 on Friday in time for this meeting. So that should be marked submitted. Otherwise, everything else that is outstanding, the photometric plan, colored elevations, material spec sheets, and material samples are traditionally submitted at final site plan review, but nonetheless outstanding for now. In accordance with Article 7.27 of the zoning ordinance, the proposed plans for the development must meet the following conditions. The location, size, height of the building, walls, fences shall be such that there's adequate landscape open space for light air access. The building shall be designed so that there's no interference with adequate light to adjacent lands. The building shall be designed not to hinder reasonable development of adjoining property and not to diminish the value thereof. The site and its relation to the streets shall be such as to not interfere or be hazardous for vehicular and pedestrian traffic. And the proposed development will be compatible with other uses and buildings in the neighborhood. So finally, the recommendation from the planning department is that the planning board approve the preliminary site plan review for 219 Elm Street, All Seasons 2, with 9 conditions, which seems like a long list, but as I mentioned before, many of the things are required at final site plan review and traditionally submitted then. I'll try to summarize these. 1, submit plans showing the side setbacks at a minimum of 10 feet on the north side. The applicant must complete the requirements of 3.08 to receive additional building height. 3, the applicant must submit a rooftop plan. 4, the applicant must modify the landscape in the landscaping bed in the south to show an adequate density of evergreen plantings to fully screen the off-street parking facility. The applicant must submit details on all proposed RTUs. The applicant must submit material specs, samples, glazing calcs for the design review. The applicant must submit details on the types and placement of all proposed light fixtures as well as a photometric plan. 8, the applicant must submit an existing conditions plan, which is no longer applicable. Please scratch out number 8 that has been submitted. And 9, finally, the applicant must comply with the requests of all city departments.
Thank you, Nick. Are there any questions from the board for Nick? Let's see. We'll start with Mr. Sheriff.
Thank you. Nick, one of the things I had trouble figuring out several things from this package, but is the entry for the public, which I guess is at the northeast corner of the building, is there some marking proposed so that the public will understand where to go as opposed to walking up to one of these units on Elm, which is, where normally people would think the entrance is?
So I am not sure. There's obviously no signage proposed, but sorry for this terrible red line, but that is the entrance I'm speaking of.
That's northwest.
It's northwest.
Yeah.
Northwest, correct. I think that's correct.
Yeah.
So is that where it is? It's on the northwest, not in the northeast?
Right.
The northeast is at the rear of the building.
Right. So northwest on Elm Street.
Okay. So I guess the same question. So the answer apparently is that there's no marking or signage or anything that you're aware of.
That's correct.
Okay. Second question. I couldn't tell from the existing conditions plan how I guess it's the one face of the All Seasons building related to this site, and that's the one that heads toward the south. Is it when you go back to the northeast corner of the building, then you've got the parking area behind it. Is the All Seasons building at the east side of the parking lot?
So the new proposed building is going to be roughly here, where the parking area will be back here. So this is the entrance that we have been talking about up here.
Yeah.
And the hashed area would be the parking area.
So Nick, do we have a plan in our packet that shows that in some context to the surrounding site with the appropriate overlap? I don't know that I saw one.
As in the new building?
Yes.
So they kind of submitted this massing plan, which I would say would probably be the closest. Oops.
Which doesn't answer my question.
Right.
So Mr. Scher, would you mind repeating your question?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out if we take, well, you can't see where I'm pointing with my finger, right? But if you look at the east, which is the back facade of the building, new building, this building that we're being asked to approve, where is that in relation to the west facade of the existing All Seasons building? Does it butt up against it? Is it separated by the parking lot? I mean, I couldn't figure that out.
Oh, I see. I think I see what you're saying.
Fair question.
So this is the existing, also, well, I guess that doesn't show it quite well, but there's an existing landscaping bed here. And then this is the east facade you're talking about, the rear of the new proposed building.
Uh-huh.
So this is the existing all seasons building. This is the start. This is the south, and this would be the west.
But Nick, to Mr. Scher's
May I
point,
answer that?
yeah, but who is asking?
Mark.
Mark. Pardon me.
Yes. If you go to the site plan, they should show the building, and what happens is the northeast corner of the new building does not touch the southwest corner of the old building, but they are close. They're within a couple of feet. So those two corners kind of come close to each other.
So does the site plan show how the cars get, where they go in and out in relation to where the facade of the existing building is? Because if they do, I missed it.
No, the cars don't enter from the all seasons. They enter from the alley to the south.
Okay. All right. I mean, I guess I would have thought that the existing conditions drawing would have answered that question for me, and I didn't see it.
The existing building is very, very faintly shaded, Mr. Scher. You have to zoom in really closely to see it on the site plan.
All right.
It's not working.
And I guess just two other things for staff. Has there been any either discussion or drawing that shows whether or not the applicant's going to centralize, pick up and drop off, and if so, how that would work?
No.
Okay. And then the last thing is just a comment, I guess, which is that I'm like some of the other folks who've spoken, I'm troubled by how fundamental 2 extra floors of a building are at preliminary site plan. And, I would have expected to see at this point in the process a very clear demonstration of how they were going to qualify. And from my reading of the materials, I would be very disturbed if every building that's non-smoking within a quarter mile of a bus stop and a mile of the train station qualified for an extra, or, ticked off one of the boxes to qualify for an extra 2 floors. So, I'm just uncomfortable at simply passing on at the preliminary site plan and saying, okay, we're going to give you preliminary approval for your, your 5-story, 2-story extra building, so you can get to final, but we don't really know how you're going to, meet the requirements of the ordinance.
Okay. Mr. Boyle.
Just a very quick point. If Nick could go to the very beginning of the graphic pack, it's entitled "All Seasons of Birmingham Phase 2."
Unmute myself. Naturally, my computer's getting slow on this request, so...
Well, the reason I'm asking is that it begins to give Mr. Scher and others a better sense of where the building is where the site is vis-a-vis All Seasons Phase 1. It clearly designates the alley. It clearly shows the abutment with the other parts of All Seasons Phase 1. It's just to try and help you and other people to get a sense of, now, it's a site, it's not the building, but at least it helps in answering Dan's very appropriate questions. But if you can't get it, then we can't get it.
That's page 276 of your packet, for those of you following at home. Mr. Williams.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with Dan's comment on the conditions for the 2 extra stories, and I guess I share Bert's comments that I think the ordinance is perhaps due for a review. But more importantly, as I look at the 5 criteria, there are a couple that are not even close to being applicable. My question relates to condition 1, payment towards public parking facility. How much? When? For what facility?
It's a little over $27,000. Unsure when. Maybe that's
How is that calculated?
So that took some time, some research, just to see what an above ground parking space costs these days. And that was vetted relatively extensively, and that was an average.
But how did you go about calculating what the amount is? I mean, we're being asked to, in effect, sign off on this payment toward public parking facility, but there's no indication of how the amount is to be calculated, what we're actually approving, what facility are we talking about? I mean, if that facility never gets built in the Triangle District, are we supposed to have them pay towards something across Woodward?
Mr. Williams, there is a section in the zoning ordinance that actually says how much they have to pay per parking space. And we did amend the ordinance, I don't know, I'm going to say 2 years ago.
Yep.
Give or take, to come up with that amount. And what we did was we looked at the cost of per space for parking structures within the metro area and took an average of it and came up. That's how we arrived at that particular number.
Okay.
Okay. And it does have a provision in there to go up, increase over time. So that's already in there, and that's how that was established.
Right.
In terms of your question as to where that would go, the ordinance doesn't state what particular parking structure it has to go to, just that it has to be provided to the city for parking facilities.
Okay. Second question is, and following up on Mr. Shear, as I look at these 5 criteria, there are some that they're not going to be able to meet. So the question I have is, if the lead approval doesn't come until after the construction has taken place, what is the city's position with respect to the 2 extra stories that have already been constructed if they don't get LEED certification?
The LEED certification does not come until after construction. What we require is a statement, a letter from them that indicates that they will obtain some level of LEED certification, and we also make them submit the checklist, the form that I was mentioning earlier. It's like 25 pages long, where they have to go through and show all the different elements that they're providing in their plans. So low flush toilets.
But you haven't answered the question.
We require that checklist from them and a letter stating that they will comply, and they don't get their certification until after construction.
And what if they don't get certification? Then what?
We haven't had that trouble yet because...
Yeah, I know you haven't, but I want to know what the answer is.
Court.
Should we hold their C of O?
Well, that's the problem with the way the ordinance is written, and that's Bert's point. And so what's the city's position going to be? I think the developer has a right to know. I want to know, if they don't comply with 2 of the 5, what do we do about the 2 stories that have already been built?
Well, I think that the bottom line is that they would have to meet the LEED certification, so that we would hold a bond, a significant amount, and they would have to go back and make changes.
Okay.
There are many different ways that you can get points for LEED certification, from fixtures, finishings, etc., within the building that could be altered to get that. It would be costly to do so after the fact, but it could be done.
Hey, Jana, as a piggyback to that, did I not hear, or maybe Nick, did I not hear you say that the senior living is a special land use?
That's right.
So with that being said, the city commission will have final say on the final site plan and special land use permit for this. Is that correct?
Well, these are independent senior living facilities. So they're essentially regular multifamily that they're choosing to limit by age.
But doesn't the I remember hearing in the report that the ordinance says what they're proposing is a special land use. Is that true or not?
Yes, in the O2 zoning district, independent senior living is a special land use permit.
So they will be required to get a special land use permit and go to the city commission, correct?
So, yeah.
Okay. And I state that just to make sure we're all clear on the process, that the commission will see this for sure.
They're gonna probably, if they watch this, they're gonna have the same questions that
I would suspect, yes.
Bert, Dan, and I have.
Yep. Mr. Kozik.
to Jana's comment regarding these are just residential units. If it's a senior housing, the parking requirements are less. Is that not correct? Than if we're, so if
That's correct.
okay, so that is a benefit to them. Presumably the market's there, and so that would be the fundamental difference. Would be the amount of parking. And my other question is going back to the Triangle District sort of guidelines that we discussed in the community impact study. Does this building, these uses do comply as proposed? The first floor, this is not required to be a mixed use building. The first floor is not required to be something other than residential. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's not required to be retail, as you see in other locations, primarily in the downtown.
You can build residential from 4-1 up to 3, 4, 5.
Okay. Ms. Whippleboyce, I see your hand is up.
Yep. Just a few little questions, I think. First of all, the side setback that we're talking about for 10 feet, that's on the north side of the building. Is that correct? Because there's a door and a window there.
Yeah, and it's only one window on the first floor level in the lobby area, but it's a window nonetheless. Yep.
Okay, and
Looks like there's a door there too, though.
yeah, I see a door
I see a frost
and
pad.
3 windows. Well, it's all sort of together.
Okay.
But yes, okay, north side. Thank you for clearing that up. In the report, it's mentioned that the height of this proposal is compatible to the All Seasons to the north of it. The rendering shows it to be, considerably higher and a full floor taller than the Elm Street elevation of the old All Seasons. So when you say that the height of this is comparable to the other, what part of the other building do you mean? The 5-story that's further to the east?
I just interject. I went to a 3D bird's eye view. The All Seasons is 4 stories maximum. It's got a little bump or something, which is a parapet, which might look like 5 stories in one zone, but
Like
that's my knowledge based on that information. It's a 4-story building. It drops down to 3 stories on the south.
So contrary to the report, this truly has a whole nother story than the All Seasons. Right, yes. Okay, one more question then. My last question about it is when a building with these 2 additional floors granted is constructed, and those floors have to be set back on the Elm Street elevation. Were it on another corner other than an alley, would the side elevation have to be set back as well? So the south elevation, would it too need to be set back on the 4th and 5th floor? And is it? So that's my first question. My second part of this question would be: is it not set back because it's an alley and not a formal street, or does none of that apply?
Jenna, do you happen to know that offhand?
Yes, you only need to set it back from the street.
So an alley is not considered a street?
Correct. For the purposes of requiring the upper floors to be stepped back.
But were this on, say, a street, I'm trying to come up with the name of one, and I can't think of what the next street down is.
If it was a corner with 2 streets, then we would have to look at the ordinance. I can't remember how it's written, but I know it is from a street, and I can't remember if it's just the front, from the front setback line where it has to be set back, or if it would be the front and side on a corner lot. But in any event, it definitely does not need to be set back from the alley.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not sure I love that. This alley is really a street here, in my opinion, and that elevation is, it's huge, and so I guess I find that a little unfortunate. But thank you for clearing it up.
Mr. Jeffers.
Similar to what Janelle was just saying, this scale, I drove all around there, and in my day job, I've shown a lot of houses in that area. And at the 3-story southern part of the All Seasons, it kind of towers over the houses. The 4, you can see it's even higher. And at 5, where it's just straight down, I just have a concern with that. To me, that's a thing that changes the character a lot. And our 4.2 says that the location, size, and height of the building, walls, and fences should not be such that they interfere with light, air, access to adjacent land and buildings. And I know we've approved tall buildings that were near residential, but I don't know, this one's really close. It's really close. The other thing that kind of bothers me is I read through the triangle plan today, and Jana's right. It doesn't say you have to have residential, but
They don't have to have
retail, right? But it does say that the area, there needs to be mixed use within buildings. There should be some residences that are above, on the upper floors above retail, and there can be some residences on the first floor. But I look at the whole area and look at percentages. And with this having residential on the first floor, you now have that huge long stretch along Maple, and now you're coming down Elm. And if you look at this plot as a percentage of the overall triangle, it's a good chunk. And I'm just wondering, can you have that big of a chunk that doesn't have this representative? It's just 100% really residential, and still be able to capture ultimately the flavor that's what's in the triangle.
Before I turn it over to Mark to respond, perhaps, or provide any other input, I guess I'll just throw in a couple of 2 cents and maybe a question as well for the applicant. General comment, I tend to agree with most of what I've heard, the concerns expressed. I am not necessarily concerned about the use itself and not having retail. I actually applaud the idea of trying to provide another option for those that are not quite ready to go into assisted living but want to stay in Birmingham. So I'm very happy to see that in town. From a functional perspective, I am very concerned with the fact that this building, there's no connectivity on site between the back and the front. And if you park in the parking lot, you don't have one of the garage spaces. There is literally no way to get to the front of this building unless you go all the way around the alley, down Elm Street, and into the front door. I did a quick measurement, and it's about 350 feet, which doesn't sound too much. Of course, it's also the same distance from the front door to Quadoba, across Maple and across Poppleton. This being geared toward people in their 60s and early 60s, I wonder about the rationale there. And so I guess I'll just close by saying, in general, Mark, I'd like you to talk about that, but I'm concerned that this entire project, there's an old adage about trying to fit a certain amount of contents in a 5-pound bag. And I'm worried that we are trying to put a great big building on a very, very tight site, and that it's not really working. So with that, I'm going to throw it to the applicant with everything you've heard, and wonder if you have any comments, input, answers to some of these questions.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, regarding your concern about the access to the building from the back, in the northerly stairwell, there is another door that you can access from the rear parking to get into the stairwell and into the lobby with the elevator. So you'll have access at the front of the street at the north end, which will be indicated by, we'll have probably an address right there. There's an awning that comes out from that recessed door. That's an access to the to the lobby with an elevator.
Is that barrier free?
Yes. Yep. And there's a door at the back of the stairwell that actually has the access from the parking lot to that same lobby. The reason people won't just be walking up and rattling the doors of those 3 units that have frontage on the street are, you can see on the front elevation, they have a little like a decorative gate at the front door, so it's clear that it's not a public entrance. And we can certainly work with staff to try and define that better or differently if that is a concern still. Regarding the scale of the building in that area, it is taller than the All Seasons, but by far it has less mass just because of the sheer square footage of All Seasons. One thing I think it's important to note is that right now there's some fairly old office buildings to the south of us that are 1 to 1.5 stories. That area is zoned for 3-story attached single family, which means 3-story townhouses are going to be built there. And I'm guessing it's in the near future rather than later, just because I think those existing buildings are kind of getting to their end of their shelf life, and that area is becoming more valuable as a residential asset. So I think I showed that on the massing plan, is that area is in the near future going to become 3 stories along that entire frontage. So that's going to then kind of position the appearance of the scale a little differently. Regarding LEED certifications, we're currently going through a process in West Bloomfield where our building has to be built so it could qualify for a LEED certification. So we're well aware of the process. It's on us to make sure we meet it because we're the ones who suffer if it doesn't. And we actually are getting experience in doing that. And it is a process, and it does have a lot of paperwork, but that extensive paperwork is what assures you when you're done, you shouldn't be left high and dry if you've done everything correctly. 5-story approval at the preliminary site plan level. I think I mentioned, I think in our paperwork at one point, but we are going to be making the contribution to the parking fund, and we will be obtaining LEED certification. The other ones we can't meet, but we're committing to it. And again, we can't really go into a lot more design detail on how we're meeting LEED because it comes down to where you purchase items, how you separate your garbage on the site, everything. It goes from the immediate planning all the way up through construction, and it can cover any facet of the building. So right now it would be literally, I don't want to say impossible, but it's very, very cumbersome to go through and try and pick exactly what we're going to do until we get further into some architectural design and some staging of the construction of it. Let's see, I think that was the primary concerns. But if anyone else had any questions, I'd be certainly happy to address them at this point.
Anybody else on the board? Mr. Koza.
So a few things. I don't know how long I've been on the board now, but one of the things that at least I'm very unhappy with, I like your building, the All Seasons building. I presume that's yours as well. Mm-hmm. The fact that our ordinance allows living units right at the 0 lot line, street sidewalk, is absolutely terrible. I walk that often, and I don't think I've ever seen, which frankly, if I lived there, I'd be doing the same thing. My drapes would be closed. My blinds would be closed. I'm uncomfortable walking down that street because it's a long building, and I tend to look to the right and to the left, and so very different than what we have in our downtown. I cannot think of a condition like that on the other side of Woodward. If I'm walking down a street, I can window shop. I can, even if I'm looking into office environments, there's something to look at. And not be looking at we might as well have no windows. There's no animation. And that's not, well, it is your fault, but it's our fault that we allow that, shame on us, because we're about creating walkable communities and creating connectivities, between buildings and frankly, and we discussed this, I'm not sure if you were around at that time, but the All Seasons, I said, why, and sorry to talk about the other project, which is not what we're reviewing, but I want to use it as a point of reference. You know, why you wouldn't have put your public spaces, your lobby, your library, your hair salon, your billiards room, why you wouldn't put that along Maple and put people where they want to be more private. It's just not, I can't believe it makes sense for you. You know, we use the term, I think it may have even been in here, you know, live work. I mean, who are we fooling here? These are not live work units. And then, you know, the entry points, the fact that you have, you know, so I think like, where have I seen this? So if you walk around in Boston, New York, and Toronto, and, you know, we do have residential units that are sort of at the street. Typically they're raised up or set back, and they have porches, and they have lower level, you know, areaways and whatnot. It works. I love it. But I'm surprised that you continue to want to invest money and create. Who would want to live in these units? Who would want to have their bedroom where somebody can walk by and knock on the window? It's just bad. So I know what it's going to look like. They'll be the last ones to probably sell or rent, and the drapes and the blinds and will always be shut. So again, I can't keep you from doing that. I don't think, although I think Stuart was, I think it was Stuart who was certainly onto something. This is not just a, you know, one singular building, small footprint. This is a part of a bigger block. And at what point do you need to integrate the mixed use because it doesn't exist around there. And I see some of the other flaws, like, you know, typically you don't control your neighbor's property. In this case, you do. I'm not sure if this is a separate entity and from a legal standpoint or whatnot, but you even said people from here would use dining and other parts, social parts of your existing building. But, you know, I don't see where in your design you have in any way made that, you know, a nice, easy experience. I mean, you have a door on the north coming out of the lobby to what appears to be a concrete pad. I don't think it even connects to the parking lot. I wouldn't necessarily love it if it did. You know, I'm thinking, why is it there? That's not required for egress. So I just see flaws in here. And the reason we want to see floor plans is we want to understand how your building interior connects to the fabric of its context. On the south side of the building, you have a number of fire pump rooms and trash rooms and, you know, all these things that, and you have these doors to the outside. I mean, that's a fairly prominent elevation. I think that was pointed out by Janelle. I mean, there's a lot of traffic that heads north on Elm Street. You know, it just, you know, it's not great. It's got some flaws, and I'm disturbed by the height. Again, I counted the floors, unless I'm wrong, but photographs typically don't lie. You know, All Seasons looks like a 4-story building to me that tapers down to a 3-story building in the south. You know, this building, you know, I disagree with you. It's got a smaller footprint. I think it'll feel bigger and taller than your current building. So I'm disturbed by a number of aspects of this, and you know, I've already talked about the LEED certification, all the challenges. Again, I think we have sort of a flawed zoning ordinance because we don't control the U.S. Building Council. Thank you. So those are just comments. I don't know if you want to respond to any of that. I'd be happy to listen.
Well, I certainly can say that we haven't had any problems leasing the first floor units. It's a desirable area and a desirable place to live. The buildings have a lot of great finishes, and the interiors are nice, and no one complained about that part of it. I can understand where you might not like it from the street because of your personal preferences, but we really haven't any problem with the leasing aspect of it. Regarding the other items, the alleyway is loading, so that's why we put the it's our access to the site to put things in there. So that's why we put all the electrical rooms and the trash room and stuff. We did try to put the trash room inside so you wouldn't have a dumpster that's exposed to people to the south and everything else. So I mean, we've done our best to work with a very tight site in an unusual circumstance, and we think we came up with a good solution to many of the issues.
I see Mr. Besnos has his hand up as well from the development team. Sir, would you like to add anything?
Yes. Can you hear me? Oh.
Yes,
can you
sir,
hear me?
please.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to respond to something that you actually raised earlier about the connectivity for phase, our phase 2 development for all seasons. We've been very fortunate in our original phase of all seasons to maintain a very high occupancy and a high demand. And we feel that we have a very good understanding of the market and the residents we serve and the prospects that we see. The leasing process for senior living starts many, many years before people actually potentially even move into our facility. And what we find is there's a segment of the population that really is looking to downsize for a variety of different circumstances, but really not ready for whatever reason, whether it's psychological or they want more space or want more independence from, living in a communal building, but, they're still living in a home, but they would want, they want to downsize but they want to build relationships. They want a social environment. So, and many people that we found, want more space. They want an elevator building. But they don't want the stigma in terms of being in assisted living or independent living building. So we intentionally, having studied the market, talking to a lot of prospects, decided when we acquired the site and when we were pursuing this to look at a separate development, really just branding it with the All Seasons name that we feel that we've earned respect in the neighborhood, in the city of Birmingham and the surrounding communities in terms of, providing good service to our residents. So that's really all this is. These units are larger than our earlier phase. They are, they have 10 of the units have garages. As we say, they're really meant for somebody who is downsizing from their house that might have otherwise purchased a condo, but not ready to move into sort of an independent living facility building. So if we connected it, it would defeat the purpose. So we really don't believe these people are not even going to get meal plans. Right now in our independent living building, we offer our residents 2 to 3 meals a day. And we're providing all of these activities. This is really just being, affiliated with All Seasons, being able to participate with exclusive events that are not daily. These are things that might happen once a month, twice a month. They may or may not decide to participate at all, but we will be there providing cleaning to their apartments. It's almost like living in a full service type hotel. So we feel that that's an appropriate way to do that. It doesn't need to be connected. This type of situation we are building right now in Ann Arbor. We have that exists in other markets here in Michigan where you have detached living that is completely separate from a main building, that even with the outside weather condition, that people are not expected to come over and walk across. Obviously, this is an urban site. It's a tight site. We do have our architect here. Xander, he can talk a little bit about some connections if somebody did happen to walk over, how we were considering that. But that is our intent. That was our intent in terms of how we're conceiving this project. These are high-end senior living rental units People want the comfort of living in a senior development versus just renting an apartment where there might be potentially more noise or other things. And they want the services. So I did want to address that, and I hope that answers your question a little bit more. And then if I may, I did want to talk a little bit about the first floor, that residential concept that was raised, because we tried to design these as townhomes, which exist in this neighborhood. As Mark indicated, even on the phase one side of the All Seasons, even along Maple, we do have a few commercial uses there with our hair salon and some offices, but we do have people that enjoy those units. These are going to be much more private in terms of there's a step, they go there, they look like individual townhomes. And we think it's part of urban living and it will be attractive. There's also access to those units from the corridor as well. So they don't have to walk from the front door if they don't want, but they can open that up and personalize that. So there's only a few of them, but we think that they'll be very attractive.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board? Mr. Williams.
Yeah, I wanted to offer really a comment on the topic that Bert raised, and that's my recollection when All Seasons was approved, and that is that it tapers down to 3 stories at the south end. And I think, frankly, that was in the process of approval. It goes back 10 years, I guess. Unfortunately, I was there. And I think there was concern expressed at the time by the existing planning board that it should taper down in height, and frankly down to 3 stories at the south end. And it, I believe, is higher at the north end, which is further away from the residential units that Stuart has mentioned. I'm uncomfortable with 5 stories in this location. I'm uncomfortable for a couple of reasons. Number one, because of the height and the impact on neighbors. And I'm not sure in this format we've got the neighborhood association activated to look at this. The second thing is because of the request for the 2 additional stories, and I come back to that. I know I'm a broken record on this point, but I'm uncomfortable with approving a 5-story building at this point, even on a preliminary basis, where we don't have any idea how they're going to comply with the LEED design. So at a minimum, I would simply say that if you looked at the proposed resolutions, that the resolutions have to be phrased differently with respect to complying with 3.08E. And my view is we got to have a pretty clear understanding of what the LEED compliance plan is by the time of final site plan approval, if we're thinking of going to 5 stories. I'm not comfortable in leaving that to the building phase.
Okay. Mr. Jeffries, and then your turn.
He's muted. I'm trying to unmute him now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go, Stuart.
Okay. All right. Yeah, this massing is really, really bothering me. A question: was there any attempt by the applicant to reach out to the neighborhood, kind of talk to them about the plans? I mean, I just know for a fact, having been in the backyards of a lot of these homes when I've shown them, there's a significant impact from the existing building, which is not nearly as tall. I mean, a little bit of an exaggeration, but it feels a little bit like the Death Star, like hanging right there on you. It's very noticeable. I mean, it's not a bad looking building, but it is definitely noticeable. And to have this at the west, the sun's going to set about 4:30 for these guys at 5 stories. I know the 300 feet that we do or whatever wouldn't get too many houses, I guess. So I know a lot of times, like Whole Foods and some of the projects that have been real successful around here, they've reached out to the neighborhood and kind of gone through the plans to get their feedback. Was that done here?
Mark, would you like to respond?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to mention regarding Mr. Williams' point of info for the LEEDs certification. By the time we get to final site plan, we will have had to identify, the rooftop units and the quantities of stuff, and we'll be into the design phase. So we can certainly provide the checklist of all the items we're going to be going for. We may not have 100% of it, but we can certainly provide enough to show that we could reach that certification by final site plan stage. Just for preliminary site plan, we're not even sure what type of air conditioning unit we're going to be choosing. But by final site plan, we will be looking at those type of information. So that one, if that's a concern for preliminary, we can certainly have a lot of information about that by final site plan.
And Mr. Jeffrey's question is, have you had any conversations with any neighbors?
No, we have not contacted neighbors other than the buildings directly south of us, the offices, because we were actually interested in some of those. So we've talked to some of those owners there.
Okay. Thank you. Unless the board, Mr. Williams? Yes.
I would simply point out that from a historic standpoint, I believe before we approved the building on the north, on the west side of Elm, north across from the new condominium building, I think that we requested that they meet with the neighbors prior to that building being approved, even for preliminary. And that was really the first time that we had requested developers to meet with neighbors before approval. So in the immediate vicinity and actually further west from the neighborhoods, we insisted upon that in the past. Back to Stuart's point, I guess.
At this point, I'd like to see if anyone in the public has any comments related to the application. The board has pontificated for a while. Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment? I do not see any hands. Going once. All right, well, we will bring it back to the board. So board, Stuart?
A question for Jana. Do you know how many houses were noticed? I remember Market Square, just the way that thing was laid out, it ended up only hitting 2 houses.
I don't have the map right in front of me right now because I'm not in my office, but I think it only hit like 1 or 2. It didn't go very far into the neighborhood. You're correct about that. Because really, if you remember with the All Seasons, there were 3 or 4 houses that were directly impacted by the All Seasons, and this one only picked up 1 or 2 of those.
Yeah, I think Doug Feeham's the president in there, if I'm not mistaken, who's usually pretty active and might be a good guy to reach out to.
I believe you're correct. He is the president, and we didn't hear from any of the neighbors.
Right. And to be clear, just out of fairness to the applicant, this property does not abut any single-family residential housing, correct?
Correct.
And across the alley is, it doesn't even share a frontage across the alley with any single-family. It's with a 1 or 2-story little office. Commercial space, correct?
Yes.
So we're talking about single-family residential to the east of the property, not anything that really abuts or is adjacent to it, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Nick?
And just to reiterate, that building on Forest that Mr. Williams referenced, there actually is residential right to the east, like right across Elm Street. So that project did directly abut single family.
Mr. Boyle.
Yeah, on the same topic, Jana, could we be real specific about the closest residential development, which would be east on Forest? My recollection is that the first 3 buildings are indeed commercial buildings. They're single story, very elderly. Am I right? So if we go and count them, are we looking at 4 properties that are commercial before we hit the first residential?
If you can bear with me for 1 minute, I am attempting to pull up a map and put it on your screen so you can see it.
That would be helpful, because I do think this is an issue that has a huge bearing on the development. I take Stuart's point. I get the fact that the setting sun is going to be impacted by a 5-story building, but I think if we were to really do a daylight analysis, good old-fashioned planning stuff, we might find that it doesn't affect any residential development.
Bear with me again for 1 second. I'm trying to work a couple of different computers at once here.
Okay, while Ms. Ecker is working on that, are there any other quick comments from the board? I see Mr. Beznos. I apologize if I am butchering your name. It is not intentional, sir. While Jan is pulling that up, Mr. Beznos, did you want to comment quickly?
Sure. And you didn't butcher my name. It's correct. So,
doing my best.
Thank you. I was really going to say the same thing that just said, that we are really in a commercial district, which is being so close to Miami, Maple, and with the commercial uses that are surrounding the property, as well as the Triangle District, which my understanding was the intent was to encourage redevelopment in that area. So, we did not contact the neighbors, as was mentioned earlier, but we felt that that there was very little impact in the additional height or the proposed development to any of the neighborhoods. And the only reason why the existing All Seasons dropped to 3 stories is because it was within that 150-foot sight line. And I'm sure Jana can point out exactly those houses.
Yes, I do have the map of the aerial view up on the screen now. Can everyone see it?
Yes.
Okay. I have no way of... Can you see this?
Yeah, we all can. Yep. Go ahead.
Can you see the little hand?
Yes. Done.
Oh, good. Okay. So this is the site we're talking about. This is the All Seasons, and these are the couple of houses that backed right up to the All Seasons. So this site here that we're talking about, there's an alley, and then there's these commercial, I think they're 1 stories right here. So to the chairman's point, there's no single family house immediately adjacent to it. It is down here. But I think 1 or 2 of these were picked up by the 300 foot radius for noticing purposes, but they're not directly adjacent to the site.
And if I can speak, I think this is very helpful to see it. A point for the architect, we could have more of these. That would be very, very helpful.
Please. Context.
Nobody seems to give it to us, so we're going to do it ourselves. But here it is, where it says 855 Forest Avenue, right? You see that? Yeah, that's the last commercial development. And I think even the setting sun would not be impacted, because this is almost due west over on the left-hand side of the screen. I think that the first property would not lose evening sunlight.
And if you recall, the building that's proposed, there's parking in the back.
Right.
So the building would come back to about this area here.
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily changes the whole dynamic, but I think it is a very valuable point to think about. This is a tall building, but on the other hand, it's a very commercial urban environment that we've got, with the 5-story building on the west side, and a 4-story building immediately to the north and partly to the east. So I don't think we're imposing we're not on Old Woodward Avenue, if I can dangerously mention that with building.
Ms. Whippleboyce.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So back to the height of the building, I understand that, of course, if the applicant can satisfy the additional requirements so that they can qualify for the 2 extra floors that they are theirs to have. But I think what's causing me, it's hard for me to wrap my head around is, right out of the triangle plan, the explanation of how the heights of these buildings was determined and set up in this plan puts beginning at Woodward with the taller 7-story buildings and then the building height should step down to 4 or 5 stories in the interior of the triangle district along the narrower streets. Buildings adjacent to single family should be limited to 3 stories. Putting this building next to the existing property, the existing senior living community, and having it be so much taller in scale and more massive than the other building is hard for me to be okay with. It doesn't seem to do what the triangle plan proposes we should do. Starting with the taller buildings on the exterior as you work your way in, getting gradually shorter. In fact, this is quite a bit taller than the building on Maple. So I think that for me, at least, that's part of the struggle here. And I know that they can potentially qualify for the 2 additional floors, but I'm just not sure it's the right thing right now.
I see a hand or two up. We'll take those. I will remind the board that we're about 2 hours into our discussion of 219 East Maple. So I would hope that we are coming to a point where perhaps for this evening we would be thinking about our direction. Mr. Kozik. Oh.
He's muted. I'm working on it.
Bert, you're muted.
Yeah, I can't seem to unmute him.
I can't either. He's got himself muted.
Does that work?
There you go.
There you go.
Good.
Best comments you've ever made.
And he's all lit up.
So let me take a positive approach to this. And I think if I don't know, Jana, if you can quickly put up the site plan you just had, but in some ways, so this is development. We currently have a building that's sort of small, has surface parking around it. It almost feels a little bit left over, if you will. So I don't think anybody's trying to preserve what's there and say that's great development. So I like the fact that they're proposing a building there to sort of fill the corner. I've already talked about the first floor use. I don't get it. It's going to be again a lifeless building at the first floor, at least as a pedestrian. I wish the public entry was more. So let me play architect for a moment. Sorry, I wish it was more prominent. I think you misinterpreted my comments earlier. By the way, I'm not suggesting that this building should link to the existing building. I actually like the fact that it's maybe sort of separate, and it does force people to go down and get onto the street and go do other things, even if they go to the existing building. My point was that and maybe it's the drawings that it was hard to understand that context, and it at least on the north and west side, it didn't seem like, you were treating it like the back and not with great care in terms of how it connects from a landscape hardscape to your existing building. If you look at the north elevation, can you pull that up, Jana? And I promise I won't be too long here, but
Nick, do you know what page that is on the?
I do. It's 287.
All right, hold on 1 second.
So as you're doing that, so again, quite a few people travel south on Elm and north for that matter. What's good about that elevation from a design standpoint?
Did you want the east or the west?
No, the north. I think you're showing it right there.
Oh, okay.
It's a blank wall, and So can you push it back a little bit so you're staying away from whatever zoning issue or fire separation assemblies might be between properties, and put some windows in there? There's no care, there's no design sensitivity whatsoever. And maybe because you're trying to cram so much square footage on that block, but this is what I have to look at every day if I drive south or walk south on Elm Street. I'd like to see some improvements to that. I think your graphics, it even makes it look like a 6-story building or 6.5-story building, because you have these fire stairs that extend up, makes it even taller, makes that elevation even more brutal with the chimneys. The south elevation, I think you've done more to add windows and things like that, but on the first floor, those are just a bunch of, as I mentioned earlier, mechanical, electrical type spaces. I'm not, at least I'm not that afraid that this adversely affects the single family neighborhood, because I think it's distant enough from it. In some ways, having a taller building that maybe punctuates that intersection might not be a bad thing, but I just see that there hasn't been anything done other than the front elevation, the Elm Street. It's stepped back, but there's nothing on the rear or the sides that sort of mitigates this blank, brutal, severe wall. And so I don't know if that's a final design thing. I don't think it is, because you'll have to massage some things that'll affect the site and the footprint and the floor plans. But those are my observations. But I want to be positive in that I think having a building here is a good thing. And if you look at how Forest is developed in Elm, and there's lots of good things happening there. So I like the fact that you're bringing people into this neighborhood, you're doing development. But I think it needs to be tweaked a little bit to make it a little bit more neighborly and better fit the context.
Okay, I'm going to take it to the applicant's architect, Mr. Bogarts, and then I'm going to bring it back to the board. Please, sir, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, hi. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Appreciate everybody listening and so forth. I wanted to address the north and south elevations. We're getting a lot of feedback about how that's a tall, flat wall. And on the north side, we're not permitted to have any windows or openings. As we've already discussed, you do have the single or the doors on the north elevation that we wanted to create a connection to the first phase. We would have to do a fire rated door there, and we wanted to talk further about that. We wanted to get input on that door location, but from the ordinance, we're not allowed to have any windows. So we're going to take and do a study and look at this elevation again, because the comments are valid. It needs some more adornment, some special attention. On the south side of the building, similar comments. We'll also address that as well. Because of that public alley, though, we are allowed to have windows in the south wall. Jana, we had a discussion about that back when we were allowed to sit face to face in the same room. We did talk about that, and we even brought in Bruce, the building official, and because of that alleyway, we do meet that 10-foot setback requirement. So we are allowed to have windows on that south elevation. And then in response to Mr. Kosek's comment about drapes being pulled on windows for first floor units, there's different ways we can handle that. First of all, the bottom of the window is 3 feet off the floor. So we could do like a cafe style where the bottom half of the window has shades and the top half is not. Each person is different. My mom is 75. She lives on Maple Street now. She loves to watch everything go by. And this type of unit is going to attract that type of person who wants to be right there who is, again, not ready for assisted living, but is downsizing and wants to take it easy and just watch and be right where all the action is. But I hope I've addressed some questions. The ordinance does allow us to have the extra 2 stories. If it's the north and south elevations that we need to take a look at and come back with, we're more than happy to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bogarts. I appreciate that. I'd like to bring it back to the board. It has been a little over 2 hours on this topic. I think we need to start thinking about where we're headed tonight, and less about continued comments, if you don't mind. Is there a sense of the board? I'm sensing that there are some unresolved issues here. And with Mr. Bogart's comment about reviewing the elevations, is there someone on the board that'd like to venture an idea toward next steps? Mr. Boyle.
This is not a motion, but I want to take this as a package, and in effect use the current circumstances to just maybe work with the developer to try and address some of the concerns that we've heard tonight. It's not just this, although many of these elements are important. It's also updating our CIS. It's making sure that we're doing our due diligence and they are doing their due diligence. So it seems to me that it would not be, it would be going with the flow of what I've been hearing for the past almost 2 hours, that we postpone decision on this. By that, I mean the preliminary site plan review for a period that we can determine, to allow them to do the 2 things that we've already really talked about, which is update that CIS as best they can, but also think again about the way in which the ground floor works or doesn't, the way the building welcomes you off the street. Some of the comments that my architectural friends have given, I think, is worthy of some review.
Okay, I tend to agree with you, Mr. Boyle. Any other comments from the board? Discussion. Mr. Jeffries.
I think I'm leaning more towards Robin. I don't see myself voting in the affirmative tonight. Just like to see it get a little bit closer. I didn't really dial into the north elevation until Bert pointed it out, but oh my gosh, we usually are much more excited about stuff like that. But I think he's right. The way you come up on that building from turning off a Maple, that wouldn't look good.
Any other comments from the board? Hearing none, is anybody interested in a motion?
If I may just make a comment.
Please do.
If you're looking for a date to postpone to, might I suggest that May 27th is looking awfully full.
Right. I was just about to, in fact, inquire about that, Ms. Ecker. If I might suggest to the board, if a postponement is in your vision, that perhaps we postpone until the first meeting in June, and we get that the motion include a suspension of the rules to allow us to hear a site plan at that meeting, which is generally a study session.
That would be June 10th.
June 10th, thank you, because I do believe the May 27th meeting is quite full.
With one item, it's quite full.
And it has more than one item.
Scott, I would make that motion that we postpone the discussion on the site plan review for 219, I forget the number, until the first meeting in June, whatever the date was. That would be my motion. I know it sounds a bit loose, but that's what I'm going.
Okay.
Could we add a date certain to make it June 10th?
Sure.
That was his intent. Yes, June 10th. So we have a motion, Mr. Boyle. Do we have a second?
We need, as part of that, to be The suspension of the rules, or is that a separate motion?
We'll do that separately since Mr. Jeffries already seconded Mr. Boyle's motion. Any conversation about the motion at the board level?
No.
Anybody from the public care to comment on the motion? We'll bring it back. Can we please call the roll?
Robin Boyle,
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries,
Yes.
Bert Kozak,
Yes.
Daniel Scher,
Dan, you're muted.
Yeah.
Daniel Scher, okay.
Yes.
Brian Williams,
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce,
You're muted.
Also muted, Janelle.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce,
Yes.
Scott Klein.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you very much. Might I quickly, before we move any further, request a motion from the board to suspend the rules for June 10th to allow a hybrid meeting?
So moved.
Support.
So who moved that? I did not see.
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Williams, support Mr. Scher. Any conversation? Let's again do the roll call.
Brian Williams,
Yes.
Daniel Scher,
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce,
Yes.
Robin Boyle,
Yes.
Scott Klein,
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries,
Yes.
Bert Kozak.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And to the applicants, thank you very much. Please, I know sometimes these meetings sound, and you're veterans of this, you know this, but they sound more negative than maybe they are. We're very happy to have you here in our community, and we look forward to working with you moving forward. Please take to heart some of the comments we've made, and we look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you. So we will move forward into the study session element of our meeting tonight. A debrief and discussion on the draft master plan review process.
Yes. Well, as you know, I think several of you actually asked for us to bring this up and talk about it. Just so you know, we do have some of our consultants on the line here. In the meeting. And I was just going to go through and ask them to start their videos. So we do have Sarah Traxler from McKenna. We have Matt Lambert from DPZ. And we have Anne-Marie Erickson, who is with Van Dyke Horn, who is not with the consulting team on the master plan project, but helping the city with some messaging and PR work, essentially overall citywide. But so she's been in on some of these discussions as well. And she's the one that actually came up with some of these ideas that are listed in this memo here. As you know, we talked before, we've had 2 meetings now. We had to cancel the rest of them due to the pandemic. We don't know when we're going to get up and running again, obviously. But what can we do in the meantime to keep things moving or to maybe change the process a little bit so that it does move a little quicker once we do come back? So there's a couple of different ideas that are thrown into this memo that I'll just go through.
Jana, I apologize for interrupting. Perhaps before we get into that, could we briefly step away from jumping to a new solution to, I think the reason I wanted the board to talk about this briefly, briefly, I might add, was to get a sense of the board's satisfaction, if you will, with the first 2 meetings without reliving them. We have a process that we've been starting. Do we feel that it's worked? What has worked and what hasn't, perhaps at a very, very high brief level? And maybe to that point, what is our intention with this round of public engagement? Is it simply to hear from the public? Is it to only hear certain things from the public? Is it to hear us? And with that set up, before we dive into possible solutions, which I do appreciate and want to get into in a moment, I'm very curious where the board's head is on what we've done to date and perhaps your quick, did I say brief, views of what we've done. Mr. Williams.
Well, I thought the first meeting we had was pretty good. We got a lot of good input from a variety of people. I thought the second meeting, well, I can't say what I thought. I'm in public. But I thought the comments from the public were not as useful.
Okay.
I come back to the point of, and I recognize that the plan itself contemplates sort of a revised neighborhood, whether we call them districts or neighborhoods, or whatever buzzword we want to use, input on an ongoing basis. And I made this point almost a year ago. I make it again. To me, it's very hard to talk about a neighborhood revision to the way we do business without getting input from the neighborhood people who we currently have. And we haven't gotten that. We haven't heard from the neighborhood associations per se of the ones that we have. And I think that's a serious omission. The second thing I said at the last meeting, and I reiterate, I think before we go any significantly further with whatever solution the consultants want or what Jana recommends, we need a meaningful sit down with the current city commission, hopefully in June. I don't think there should be anything else on the agenda because I don't think there's anything in Birmingham that's more important than the master plan. The meeting that we had last fall with 3 people on the commission who are no longer there was not helpful, frankly, or is not as helpful in terms of direction from the city commission to the planning board as to what the city commission feels we should be specifically studying. So my view, and the third item, or maybe the fourth item is, I don't know when we're going to get the public back. And to me, we really should have the virtual meeting with the city commission before we re-engage the public in whatever format we want. And then finally, I don't have a clue as to how we do this or what it means, but to do a master plan right now in light of the pandemic with the consequences that no one fully can understand or comprehend going forward, to me suggests at least a slight pause to try to take into account as best we can with information that may become available to think about the planning, particularly as it relates to the downtown and neighborhood areas adjoining downtown. And because I just foresee huge changes, but I can't predict with any degree of certainty what they will be. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah. We're going to go Mr. Kozak, then Ms. Whipple-Boyce.
So I do facilitate these types of things sometimes, not for cities, but for universities and colleges. So I empathize with what the design team is going through, the master plan design team, because it's, these things should start and continue and have momentum and have energy. And so I feel very bad for everyone that it started and stopped and we had a change at the commission level. And so how do you keep your focus on your target? In my mind, and I don't know if how this could even happen, but the fundamental issue that I had is that everybody, or 51% of the people, have to buy off on the initial, I'll call it the mission statement, because that drives everything else. And so when I read through that piece, I had a lot of questions, and I said, I was asking myself, is that the community that I live in? Does that represent the people that I know and how they think? So I was sort of shocked a little bit, and I expressed that. And so when we had our meeting, we dealt with that. We brought it to conclusion, and then the next time we came together, I think we moved on to the next section. But if we're not all in it, not all, but the majority of people in agreement with the first section, it drives everything beyond that. And then furthermore, so ideally it'd be us, the planning board, the city commission, that would sit in a room and maybe have a conversation about those guiding principles and have, somewhat of an agreement. And then not that everything has to change, all the work that's been put in place, but as we speak to that, we can reference back to the guiding principles and say, does that meet the test? So I don't know how to have it happen. And obviously we want the public there as well to participate in these conversations and help us understand how to make the right decisions. And so but that's my thinking.
Janelle?
Of course, I don't have any solutions here, but I think a problem I identified with our last meeting in particular is when we start talking about subjects as specific as the neighborhoods, and we look for the public to come and to give their opinions. And as a board, and what we're discussing, we're attempting to stay sort of at a macro level, but yet the public come and want to ask more specific questions, and it starts to sort of boil down to real details, and we address what they ask, and it snowballs into more discussion, points that are raised, and I think we just got so far gone last time we met with all of these intricacies, and that's where we lost it. So what I don't know how to accomplish is to continue to have the public there and providing input, but yet not have us go down that hole again. So when we start talking about things that people are really passionate about, namely their neighborhoods, I don't know how to keep it big picture.
So I do want to address both Janelle and Bert's comments, because I think personally you've hit the crux of the issue. But Jana, you had your hand up. I want to.
Yeah, two things. One, I have made the request that this be one of the topics, or potentially the only topic at the joint meeting. At this time, I believe there's one other topic that's up for consideration. But secondly, I just want to point out that we have had, a year's worth of public engagement, and we had it culminate in this first draft plan. Remember, there is a second draft. So the point of these meetings, we have to keep in mind, to Janelle's point, is to keep a little more big picture, because we're taking in all of this information. The consultants are recording in great detail, I might tell you, all the comments that are being made by the public, and a lot of them are repetitive. So it would be important to say, okay, we hear your complaint or your concern or your suggestion, and we've noted that. We already have that, so let's move along. And instead of getting mired in repeating it, the same topics over and over again. And two, this is a draft. So any of these comments, we don't need to fix the draft right there at the meeting, but it will be recorded and transferred into a second draft for your review at a later date.
So I think that ties in nicely. And, to Janelle and Bert's comments, I agree wholeheartedly, Bert, first of all, that the mission statement, the guiding principles, you have to get that right. That's before you do anything else. I think where I saw the major off the rail moment in the second meeting is that I believe that as a board, we're not on the same page or in the same understanding of the intent of the meetings. And that's not to say that I'm correct in my assumption about this. And that's why I want to talk about this. In some regards, one could argue the intent of the first draft public engagement meetings that we're holding is to not hear a word from any of us. One could argue that the sole intent is to hear what the public has to say, as mind-numbingly soul-crushing as that might be on certain evenings, because this is their first time seeing a draft plan. That's what maybe my intent with these meetings was, and I think where I believe I lost control of the meeting to a degree, and perhaps got a little frustrated, is we didn't have alignment on how that process was working. And so I think we got into a discussion of us then discussing a lot of fine-grained details, pushing things through on the public as well. And we wound up with just this rather muddled affair. To me, I really would like the board to tell me whether you think the intent of this first group of meetings is for us to review this, because I don't believe that it's our job to review it first and then go tell the public. I tend to believe it's our job to get the public's input and then sit down and review it and tell them, this, we heard you, this is what we're going to do. But that's my personal belief. I'd like to shut up now and ask the other board members if they have any thoughts regarding that. I'm actually looking at Mr. Boyle a bit too, from your experience, both in the chair as well as just being involved in urban planning pursuits over these many years. But to any board member, please. Why are we doing this? What's our intent, Mr. Boyle?
I understand the concerns and I share some of them. I think one of the challenges is also about how we talk about the plan. This is not a criticism of our really competent team, but we go in and we tell them that there's a 278-page single-spaced document on the web that is our draft plan. I think by presenting it in that way and then trying to take pieces out of it and present them in the first two meetings is demonstrating that we're probably not presenting it correctly. That we need to make it much more palatable. Something that we can say, well, here's our picture of Birmingham tomorrow, or even more bluntly, here we are in Birmingham today. Where do we want to be tomorrow? And what are the bigger issues that we'd like your input to? We need to bring it down to these sort of questions and ask them for their input and not ask them to respond to paragraph 17 on page 173, which is what we've been, to some extent, trying to do. Even the brief presentations that we've got have been 17 slides long on the deck, or even more. And I think we've missed that sort of broader picture to bring the public on board. I think we need to be more. We need to help the public, and we need to simplify it and say these are the sort of issues that we want your thoughts about. Do we have enough houses? Where are they? What do you think about downtown? Do you think we should have mixed use? Do you think we should try and get the Triangle District, the Rail District going in a slightly better direction? Questions like that, and get their input and then move forward. That's my thought.
It's a great input. Just a quick follow up. Do you believe that the intent is to get those answers from the public, or for us to discuss?
I think it's for us to listen to what the public is saying about these broader drivers, the drivers of this town. What do they think about Woodward? What do they think about the downtown? What do they think about the housing market? What do they think about these two special areas that we really got excited about 2 decades ago, and they haven't really moved forward?
Okay.
But Robin,
that's probably enough.
Who sets the table for that discussion? In other words, who sets the issues as to which the public is supposed to respond? It's not the 270 pages. It's a list of issues.
Correct.
Who sets up the list of issues? We can't expect the public to come up with the list of issues.
No, absolutely not. The issues have got to come from a combination of us, our staff, with also, and I'm going to follow up your very appropriate point, Brian, it's also got to come from this, from our elected leaders.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, what we're missing.
Yes, we are.
It's part of it.
But it's part of it, yeah. But it's also about the presentation and how we bring it to the public and how we get them to respond. Now, you can then say, but the public won't respond to something unless it's about dripping taps or, rats running down the street. I get that argument. I do. People want to respond to something which is very relevant to their life and their daily sort of living in the neighborhood. But, I'm naive enough to think that some people do want to think about where will Birmingham be in 15 years' time.
Yeah. Nick?
Not sure if this is appropriate, but selfishly, this is as a new planner for my learning experience as well. But Robin, Mr. Boyle, that feels like that was the point of the charrettes and all the meetings that they had before to identify those issues. So now they've created this first draft, and this is only my opinion, stating those issues. So now we want to discuss the issues. So to revert back to identifying the issues seems to take a step back.
Fair criticism.
Fair.
But I'm trying to overcome the barrier that the chair made about the failure to get the public to engage, which is what it basically said. I want to find a way of getting them engaged.
I'm going to jump to others real quickly, but I think that maybe the hybrid here is breaking it down, not trying to get the public to review the master plan's draft,
Right.
but breaking the recommendations of the plan down in such a way that they're broad enough that they can be digestible to the public, and they can say, yes, I like that. No, I don't. Here's the reason why. As opposed to, let's go to section 6, let's go to section 7. Perhaps that's what I think you're both maybe saying. Stuart.
You just said what I was going to say. I think I agree with Nick completely. The charrettes, we got their issues. The experts and us came up with solutions, and now we want to say, what do you think of the solutions?
Bert?
So I'm in favor of asking the public to respond and us to shut up and listen. My concern is, do you get the public to show up? I remember, I don't know if it was the last survey, one of the surveys that went out, as somebody who designs and cares greatly about planning, I had a tough time reading those 20 questions and what did this mean and where is this? And so you need the right audience, and I don't know how to make that happen. And oddly, a project that I'm involved in that needs a lot of community input and support and won't be successful without it. We're doing Zoom meetings, and we're getting more people that would typically show up because they have time, and maybe they're willing to speak a little bit, to a microphone where they might not speak up in a room. But I would, I think we had some conversations a little bit maybe offline where some of us said, we have to go find our best friends and say, fill out the survey. And in the same sense, maybe we need to harness our best friends and neighbors and whoever we might know so that we really get input, because if otherwise it's just going to drive bad decisions. And I don't know how Sarah feels. I know when I had my initial one-on-one conversation with her interview, I felt she listened, and there was a lot of good interaction and probably great information that was being transferred, and she did it with many, many different people. So I'm curious, as a consultant, do they feel that they really got a sense of who we are as a community, or are they just hearing from the choir over and over again?
So maybe with that, I am going to ask Sarah and Matt and perhaps Anne Marie, depending on her mood, to let us know what they think of what they've just heard. They can tie into your ideas of these other ideas, Jana, if you like, but maybe just first, what do you think of what we've just talked about and how it relates to the reality that at least you saw, Sarah, particularly on the couple of meetings that you attended?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for allowing us to kind of chat with you. Of course, it is an informal, open meeting, but feels a little bit more casual, I suppose, than in our presentation format. I think this was really helpful for us to get some direction on, even just how we prepare future presentations. So, I definitely felt frustration during, somewhat, I would say, during the first planning board meeting, and certainly during our last planning board meeting, in terms of kind of, as someone said, what felt like muddy waters, and how we would kind of move forward and get through difficult public input. I think that I was reminded earlier that we actually were in Charette a year ago. And those one-on-one and neighborhood roundtable discussions that Commissioner or Board Member Kosick just mentioned were in April of last year as well. So, we've certainly had robust robust engagement over, more than the last year. And something that I know, Matt will speak to, but I think is actually really germane to a couple of people's comments here, is that we're eager to get to the point where we can start revising the draft to really respond to a lot of these common themes that we've heard. So, what we do as professionals on projects like this is, take all of these inputs, just like, when we prepared the first draft, and make adjustments and, really respond. So, I think that we can shorten the presentations, make them more like a executive summary, perhaps, of the plan. I think it's a really fair point. That kind of going through each detail isn't necessarily the most productive way of doing it, and continue down the path. Because I understand that up to this point, the direction we've been given from administration and the prior city commission, as you've mentioned, was to sort of review it comprehensively, this first draft.
Matt, anything to add? Good to see you again.
Yeah, well, it's as mentioned, sometimes the Zoom meetings are a little bit convenient because we can be here from afar. I certainly agree on that. The question was raised, knowing this discussion was going to happen, and I was certainly concerned that as we go further, that there are so many specific pieces of feedback that we have not had the opportunity to make modifications and respond to. So, for example, a lot of the discussion early on, quite some time ago, was about bringing forth the salient points and really simplifying pieces, which is one big piece of feedback. And then we've been getting individual issues and suggestions across the board from in terms of feedback. We also have a number of different documents from this board, from other boards and staff that we have for modifications. And so my concern was certainly at what point, given the feedback that we've gotten to date, is what we are reviewing still the relevant thing to review, or should we be revising so that we can review based on what we've heard? So that's actually what I've expressed as my main concern. In terms of what we're hearing here with the board, and my thoughts on your question to the board has mainly been that we were looking for direction on the details in these topics, that you all have as a board the ability to dive more deeply than the public can necessarily dive as individuals. And so you have the opportunity to provide that deep input because you're dealing in detail with these issues on a regular basis. You're hearing from the public's input on projects that are coming before the board and so forth. So, we see that sort of, there is certainly a lot of meat to dive into if you say, here's a big document and now come in and give us your feedback on that from a public standpoint. But from you all, you are much closer to the issues and have a broader perspective doing this work as a board. And so for us, it has been we've collected in our other interactions input from the public directly. Some of the people who come normally to meetings, and many people who don't normally come to meetings either. And so there's quite a broad amount of input from different groups. So some things vary. It's we certainly have heard some things that there's common feeling behind, and some things that certainly there are more divided issues, which are things we certainly want you to weigh in on. So essentially, I think where I feel that we are is at a point that we need to make revisions based on what we've been provided, but we want to have some clear direction from you all who have who are working on these issues on a regular basis.
So I think you and Sarah have just kind of crystallized the point that I think the rest of us have been dancing around for our conversation, and Mr. Williams began us with. You need direction from the planning board, as you just indicated, and that's what you're looking for, and that's what we're supposed to provide. However, as I can tell you, because I get phone calls from many of them outside of these meetings, there are members of the City Commission that feel that we have not even scratched the surface of public input on this document. And that is the difficult position that I believe our board is in, because to be fair, and I'll be blunt, we've received absolutely zero direction from the City Commission on this matter. So I think this points to the reason why, and Mr. Williams pointed this out, I'll give him full credit. We need to talk to the City Commission about this. Do they have input that they want to provide to us? What is their vision for this first round? Because clearly we're trying to go in two different directions at the same time, in my opinion, or better put, trying to accomplish two different tasks at the same time, and they're quite mutually exclusive. I think you raise a very interesting point. I'm curious if the board feels the same way about perhaps knowing that we have just gotten through in these first two meetings the front end, the first review from a public perspective about the guiding principles, if you will, and not gotten into the real details of the neighborhoods yet. That was coming. I wonder if this is an appropriate time to perhaps have a meeting that is directly focused on our input to questions you have just on that front end, to help you make that revision throughout, so that when we come back to the public, we have a document that's already addressed perhaps the concerns we've already had, and we don't have to go through this replay loop of comments at every turn. Board, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, I think we have to recognize that there is no perfect way to handle public engagement, right? There are going to be criticism no matter what we do. Secondly, from my perspective, it's partly a question of timeline. To me, given people's time, people's capacity, it's a wasted opportunity not to have some board feedback during these sessions. One way to do it is to have, let's call it an hour and a half of public comment. We sit, we listen, and then we have an hour or so of board reaction. And if we're going to do it in chunks, we can do it that way.
Sure.
On the other hand, if the City Commission is of a mind that they would prefer to have, have us have, I'll pick a silly number, 10 public meetings and then 10 planning board meetings to cover the same material and get the comments, so that, we're looking at a year and a half before the consultants are ready to do the second draft, it's a different story and it's a different, kind of process. My own gut sense is that if we use these, here are the solutions, broad picture, everybody has 2 minutes to comment once. We're looking for an hour and a half each time we do it from the public. If there's more, we'll schedule more timing, and then have some board reaction. We can get through this, I think, fairly and, relatively quickly compared to what a deep engagement that might not provide marginal utility.
Fair point. What does the board think? Any other thoughts on Mr. Scherer and Mr. Williams?
Yeah, I think following up on Dan's point is, I think the way we are going now, we'll have 6 meetings or 7 meetings, and then somebody will say, well, what does the planning board think? And then we'll be at the end of 2020. There has to be some way we can combine these endeavors. And maybe we wind up with 8 meetings instead of 6, but allows input for the planning board. I think the critical thing to me is what we should do is think about this, come back at our meeting in June, which is now a combined meeting, but come back and with very specific recommendations as to the process that we think we should follow. I like Dan's idea of sort of a combination meeting going forward, which we didn't do in the first 2. And present this to the city commission at the June meeting. I don't have the date, Jana. I don't know if there is one yet. And get direction from the city commission. Back to your point, Mr. Chairman, I don't really want to engage in another year-long process without the city commission giving us some direction as to how they want this project to proceed, because we don't have that.
Right.
That's my point. I think I like Dan's idea better of getting the public input, putting the planning board on the spot. Here's what we think. It's not final, but people ought to be entitled to what we hear and what we think in result of what we hear before it even gets to the commission.
Right. I would agree with both of you. I think that goes back to Sarah and to Matt's point, and maybe even Robin's. That's going to mean that we need to be very, very cognizant and aware and tight on what we're presenting and asking the public to comment on. We can't go in like we did the last 2 meetings and say you've only got an hour and a half, because they're going to say, well, wait, I got more comments. So we need to be very clear on what we're asking them so we can have a finite period. And frankly, we're going to have to tell the commission at the June meeting that that's what our plan is, and they're going to have to I don't know that several commissioners are going to be, but we're going to have to lay it out there and just be honest with them.
Yeah, and I come back to, okay, I hear what Jan is saying about another item on the agenda. It better be an important one. That's all I got to say.
We'll get to that. Stuart, you're on mute, buddy.
Stuart, you're muted.
Okay. I couldn't get off before. Somebody mentioned something earlier about this technology, this Zoom. Maybe it was, I guess, Matt. And this is maybe a little bit more detailed, but I think using videos where you can comment below, or doing a presentation that we can use over and over and capture. The one thing is this allows anybody who can't show up at 7:30 on a Wednesday, specific Wednesday, to comment. So, I mean, theoretically, this may be an opportunity that we can get more public comment. We may not hear it with our ears at that exact second they say it, but we can capture it in a lot of different ways. And I hope we can take advantage of that.
Okay. Well, this has been good. I think this has been good. I'm going to look at our consultants and Anne Marie. And is there any additional thoughts you have, or do you like the direction we're headed?
I'm going to say that I think you are absolutely headed in the right direction, and I want to commend you for your attention and care to getting public comment. But I also would say that if you're going to get through this process to the point where the planning board begins to make decisions, you're going to have to keep it very tight. And that's going to place a bit of a burden on you, Mr. Klein, as chair. But I think the presentations need to be compressed. I think you need to think about those presentations and what kind of input you want from the public. And I think you're going to have to really set the tone and direction to get through this process, honoring the public comment period, but also allowing yourselves some comment and then just being able to get through this in a manner that respects that this is the first draft and you're going to be going through a second draft as well. So I think, well, I thought the first meeting was very valuable. I had to leave early on the second meeting, so I'm afraid I didn't see the real breakdown of what happened there. But
I think it's because you left that it fell apart.
Yeah, probably.
Yes, it's my stern look. But I think that is always a danger, is that sort of crumbling away. And so I do think that places a burden on Mr. Klein in particular and the rest of the board members to be cognizant of the fact that you need to have a very tight agenda and stick to that agenda. And also, I think Sarah mentioned it early on, many of these issues come up over and over and over again. And we need to compile a list of those issues. And when people bring those issues up again, we need to say, that issue has been raised. We appreciate your comment. You know, we are going to deal with that. Because I have come to the realization, having attended these meetings, that Birmingham is a city full of tree lovers, and everybody wants the trees taken care of because we hear that over and over and over and over again. That's an easy one. And I think there are many issues like that. And also some issues where perhaps you need to just say, we've taken that under advisement. We're going to make a decision on that and get back to the public. So I think you're absolutely heading in the right direction. I think you probably do need to check in with City Commission. And, I think you should honor what you've been doing and maybe improve it a bit.
Great. All right, well, I think this has been helpful. Jana, you feel good about going to the commission meeting with a bit of this new direction?
Yes, I think we definitely need to have a discussion with them. There's no doubt.
Yep.
Because we don't know where they stand with the new commission. The joint meeting is June 15th.
June 15th.
Yes. That's a Monday night. Not sure if it'll be live or not at this point, but
you better have Zoom capacity, because I don't want to be with some of those people.
Right. Enough.
Do I get to mute all? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
If I don't, I'm not coming.
Just kidding.
Okay.
But I think we ought to assume it's going to be Zoomed.
Oh,
I think it's fair to say it will be.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're authorized to do Zoom meetings through the end of June by the governor's orders.
Yeah. I just can't imagine that in the commission room, or even worse, in the other facility on Eaton, it's too crowded. There's not enough room. There is in the commission meeting room.
Okay. Well, I think if anyone's got anything else, that's good. Sarah, Matt, Anne Marie, I appreciate your input. It's good to see you again. I think we're on the same page, heading in the better direction. So thank you much, and we'll hope to talk to you soon.
Sarah, did you have something to say? Sarah wanted to make one more comment, if that's okay.
Well, Sarah's on mute, so.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So, I just kind of wanted to leave you with the thought and reminder, that per the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, the Planning Commission, or in your case, Planning Board, is the entity that's responsible for the preparation of a master plan. Of course, you have legislative oversight and ultimately approval by the City Commission. But it's perhaps helpful to think of your body as our de facto steering committee. So while you all have been providing comments on the first and second chapter during those meetings, I'm sure you've noticed that I've been furiously taking notes, just as I did the first time we all met together. So I think that a lot of the criticism, if you want to call it that, of the first couple of meetings are things that we take to heart and can definitely pivot on and improve on, and are basically ready to just get back in front of the public and keep going, because no one said preparing a master plan was easy. And we're going to be frustrated again, all of us together, but that's just, what it takes to get through it. And we've done it a lot, and hopefully we'll continue to do it a lot in the future. So.
Matt said it was easy. He said it was easy in the interview, I thought.
Yeah.
Well, there's the preparation of it, and then there's the process.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much. I think we need to. We're coming up on 11 here. I'd like to keep moving. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it. Last topic for the night, and again, I'd like to keep this brief. It's really a discussion of our virtual meetings that we're having here. Jana, you took it to a level of maybe even adding some things to the rules of procedure, which I think was an interesting touch, and we can talk about that. One of the things that I really wanted to make sure we discuss, whether we change the rules or not, was I really think we need to limit the number of items on agendas during this time. This is just far less efficient than even our inefficient meetings in person. And we can't have 4 or 5 things on an agenda. I can't do it. So I'd really like to pose to you guys the idea of whether it's official or whether it's just policy right now, that we need to keep this at maybe three or so items, depending on what they are, in order to just keep ourselves focused. And
how many, Mr. Chairman, how many items do we have on the agenda for 2 weeks from now?
Ms. Ecker?
We have the rezoning application for 469 to 479 South Old Woodward.
Okay, that's 4.5 hours.
That's one item. The second item is a CIS review for a 5-story building at 469 to 479 South Old Woodward. The third item is a preliminary site plan review for a 5-story building at 469 to 479 South Old Woodward. And the fourth is the final site plan for 770 South Adams. So really, the preliminary site plan and CIS go together somewhat, and it's related to the same address, but that's going to be a very, very full meeting.
Yeah.
That's already, we already did not add a 5th item.
Well, I mean, look, the first item is, how many participants did we have the last time, Mr. Chairman? 40?
It was over 50.
59, I think, was the average.
So I would simply say, since we've already made the first meeting in June, a combined meeting, that we kick one of these items, one of the 4, to June. Because I think the first item is just going to consume us.
And no teeth cleaning for you, Brian. They're all shut down, so you can't use that excuse anymore.
Right.
Well, they're not all shut down if you have an emergency filling. Because you're in such severe pain that you can't stand it. But I just think, I totally agree with the chairman. I think 3 items is it, period. And I don't know how much more we're going to accomplish on a study session in early June prior to the joint meeting with the city commission.
Right.
So I'd kick one of these items that you got for late May back 2 weeks.
Certainly would be my preference, but how do others feel about the number of items in general? Maybe Mr. Scher, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think fewer is better, but fundamentally, why are we considering we're considering a 5-story building for that site?
That is the application that has been received, yes.
So why are they putting us through both?
Yeah.
Well, there's also an application down the line for a 9-story building. So I guess they're keeping all their options open.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see us getting through rezoning, preliminary, and CIS on that site all in one night, much less whatever the other one is.
Yeah, agreed. Speaking more generally, perhaps, without getting into the weeds on that, I mean, are other board members concerned about the number of agenda items for other meetings that we're doing in this virtual world? Mr. Boyle?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're backing up some very difficult ones, and we're finding flaws Now that may be due to the current circumstances. I don't know, but I think we are going to have to be careful about overloading what we do, or we won't give it the thought that we should.
I agree.
And they're tiring. I mean, I'm not working just now, but I mean, I've been hearing stories of people saying that, they're finding these days with back-to-back Zooms, morning and afternoon, really, really tiring.
Say what?
Mr. Kozak, you raised your hand.
It depends on the complexity of the application. So when I hear 5 stories, that sounds complex to me, or 9 stories. If it's so I think you have to look at what's coming down the pipeline, and so I wouldn't hold it to 3 necessarily.
I think that the 3 topics dealing with that specific site is about all we're going to be able to handle.
For sure.
Okay.
Okay, so I just want to point out that the notices have gone out for 770 South Adams. Now, that's not to say we can't postpone it. What I can do, if this is the consensus of the board, we'll have to leave it on the agenda for that night, and then you can postpone it that night to a date certain to June 10th, and I will let the applicant know that is your intention, that it's too full of an agenda, but you'll still see it on the agenda.
Okay. Do we want to indicate to the extent that the public participates? Well, I guess they don't have to come to the meeting. They can just Zoom in and we'll tell them.
Right.
Well, and I can mark it right on the agenda itself.
Can you list them first and then mark it?
Yes, yes, I can do that.
Okay, that's fine.
There might not be many residential properties within 300 feet.
Yeah. So Jana, for your benefit, would it be helpful for us to quickly look at a change to the rules of procedure, or is this good enough that our policy is in this time? What do you need to defend yourself at the gate?
Well, I think it's okay right now to say that's your policy.
Okay.
I think the thought with amending the rules of procedure is, I think, and I don't know because nobody knows, I think that we're going to see that use of this technology may be encouraged in the future, not in replacement of one-on-one meetings, but maybe in addition to. So I think we might want to consider the rules of procedure as we go forward with regards to virtual meetings. But at this time, we're under specific executive orders of a temporary time frame. We don't have to change them right now. And I think it's safe enough to say the consensus is no more than 3 items unless they're very simple.
Right. I think that's what we're hearing here, and I would prefer not to get into discussing rules this late in the meeting, and if we don't need to.
And I have to say, I think this meeting went, just from a flow standpoint, I know it was longer, but I think the discussion was better than it was 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate
We could formalize it in a motion if you're so inclined for the temporary procedure that we would only have 3 on an agenda.
I like that.
If you want.
Okay, so I'll move that no more than 3 items on the agenda. 3 substantive items on the agenda for any particular meeting for the immediate future, as long as we're under Zoom only conditions.
We have a motion by Mr. Williams. Does anybody care to second?
I'll second.
Yeah, Mr. Boyle with the second. Any conversation? Is there anyone in the public still here that wishes to comment? Looking at the hands, I see no hands going up. 1, 2, 3. We'll bring it back. All right, let's roll call this, please.
Okay. Brian Williams.
Yes.
Robin Boyle.
Yes.
Scott Klein.
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries.
Yes.
Bert Kosek.
Yes.
Daniel Scher.
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Board. I appreciate your input. I think there were no communications or administrative approvals, Jana. I think we already went over the draft agenda. Is there anything else? Mr. Jeffries?
Yeah. Just touching back on this virtual meeting thing, I've got one request. And I think this is a big difference between the 2 formats of our traditional one and this. is that if we could be on the slide you're talking about, because I found myself looking at the front elevation during the front elevation discussion, during the site plan discussion, the landscape discussion, the alley discussion. So I think it really is helpful for us and for the public to do that.
Fair point.
I have a request that Stuart have a different background for the next meeting.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Scherer, last word before we go to Jana and see what anything else.
Just a quick pickup on something Jana said. I'm hoping that the city will consider using Zoom beyond the governor's order, both for those of us who fit into high risk categories and for members of the public who likewise fit into high risk categories.
Well said. Jana, was there something, did I interrupt you?
Me?
Yes.
No. I mean, and what Mr. Scherer said is true, and I think you might see some changes coming.
Great.
But we just don't know at this point.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, with that, board, I thank you for your service. It was a long meeting, but it was a good one. I appreciate it. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Scott.
Have a good night.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott.
Bye.